You ready? Yep. So we will reconvene this meeting of the Veterinary Medical Board. We did not complete all our agenda items from yesterday. We have number 8, 9, and 12. We are going to go ahead and I'll have my board president report, and then Jennifer will have the RVT report before we go back to 8, 9, and 12, because we're waiting for Kathy Bowler to be here to discuss telehealth and so on. And also we need, okay, what does that say? Item 7?
Yeah, that's the CPEI.
Oh, okay, that's right. And we need to return to revisit an item regarding the CPEI. We may need a new motion for that. And do you want to do that?
Let's wait until we have everyone who voted on that item.
Okay. Any questions about that? So I'm bringing up my iPad here so I can do my board president report.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and do roll call.
Oh yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
I'm so tired.
That's okay. Dr. Waterhouse.
Present.
Dr. Sullivan.
Here.
Dr. Nunez.
Here.
Jennifer Laredo.
Here.
Judy Mancuso.
Here.
And right now we're missing Kathy Bowler and Dr. Nolan.
Is there anyone here that would like to introduce themselves? It's voluntary, but if you would like to state who you are and where you're from. Thank you.
Oh, Kathy's here.
Oh, good.
So I take that back. Kathy Bowler is present.
So the board president report. Dr. Sullivan, Anne-Marie, and I had a telephone conference on November 17th of last year to develop the pre-screening questions for the candidates for the MDC position. Then on November 27th, I had a phone call with Nicole Lee, who's the new HR director for DCA. The previous HR director, if you remember, was supposed to report back to us regarding a possibility of a board category size change. And so now we have a new HR director and for that matter, a new DCA director. Yep. So now the DCA is studying all boards and sizes and trying to have an evaluation of that. So this is on hold. Hopefully in the May meeting we'll have an update on that. On December 4th, I participated in a webinar from the AAVSB on telemedicine. They're developing a language for the telehealth model. They're requesting comments be made by member boards by February 28th, and so we will be discussing this shortly. And we need to communicate to them in a letter our concerns of their telehealth recommendations. There was another webinar on December 5th given by the NBME and ICVA on the new exam blueprint for the NAVLE, the licensing exam for veterinary students. The practice analysis and exam development is a 4-year process. I was impressed. The new exam is adding more foundational science knowledge, more data gathering and interpretation questions. And it was interesting that a member of the New York VMB had taken the NAVLE that day. Do you think we should take the NAVLE?
No.
Dr. Sullivan, Anne-Marie, and I had interviews with 12 candidates for the MDC over 4 days. And so this board will interview the candidates that we have selected at our next meeting in May. There was a meeting in Sacramento on January 18th with the Executive Committee, CVMA, Mike Dillon, and Christina DeCaro, which is KP Public Affairs, and there was extensive discussion about the marijuana legislation. I attended the CVMA meeting in Costa Mesa on January 26th to 28th. The main topic was marijuana use in animals. The primary points were we need research to be able to answer our clients' questions appropriately. And 2, since animals don't partake in marijuana for recreational use, why should an untrained person at a dispensary be giving medical advice to the clients about their pets' use of marijuana? And can the VMB approach the Cannabis Bureau about restricting products marketed to animals? The AAVSB is meeting in September in Washington, D.C., and they're requesting suggestions for topics. There was a teleconference on Friday, February 16th with Sonia Longman, Phil Laird, that was the attorney that was here yesterday from the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency regarding SB 27. Originally, they were just going to call me and have me on the phone call, so I managed to get Anne-Marie included in that call. The new language for regs had just come out that day, actually about 15 minutes before our conversation. And I expressed my concerns over issues that we had identified previously, the primary one being a non-professional filling a prescription, and the intent of Governor Brown's endorsement of FD 27 to monitor how medically important antimicrobial drugs were dispensed, and how that was possibly a setback to what his intent was. All the things that we discussed yesterday. The ICVA is requesting nominations to serve on the Assessment Development Committee. This committee is composed of a broad representation of species and content areas across veterinary medicine. Its duties include soliciting and appointing NAVLE item writers and participating in item and form review meetings. As new opportunities arise in veterinary assessment, the ADC will be responsible for assembling subject matter experts to meet these needs. Members of the ADC are appointed by the ICVA Board of Directors to 3-year terms and may serve a maximum of 3 terms. The ADC is responsible for the main content areas of the NAVLE, the North American Veterinary Licensing Exam. So another thing to think about. In preparing for this meeting, I found a note about regs or statute changes needed for allowing Olympic veterinarians into California. And since the Olympics is on right now, I was like, oh yeah, we need to work on that. So I believe that we are awarded the games in 2028, so we have plenty of time, but that's also something to think about, to put on the list. On Tuesday, I met with Nicole Lee, the new HR director, about our need for an interim EO and recruitment for a permanent EO. Since this was not shown on our agenda, we will need to have a teleconference meeting, we estimate on February 26th. I expressed my frustration that the salary ranges are so narrow and too low for the level of responsibility. Any questions?
Could we, since we all just recently found out about this, could we request that Anne-Marie come back to our next meeting so we could properly thank her as a board, since we haven't been able to today? Okay, good,
Yes.
thank you.
She has told me that she was planning to
Okay, terrific.
come and sit in the audience, yes.
What, are we in Sacramento next one, or can we be in Orange County, or what?
Due to the budget, we can't do any until the next fiscal year. We won't be traveling. We'll be in here in May. We'll be here.
May is here.
Yeah,
All right.
August may be a different story, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments from the public?
I had a quick question. The 26th meeting, where you're talking about just a meeting of for the whole board?
That was what Nicole Lee said at teleconference.
Yeah, we couldn't do that. It would have to be a 10-day noticed meeting.
She was counting out the 10 days, so.
Well, we haven't noticed it, so it'd have to be 10 days from notice, and we're
Okay.
already on
She-
the
she picked-
22nd.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make sure I notify her.
Yeah.
The soonest we could do something.
She was counting back from March 9th and counting back 10 days that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would be providing public notice on the 26th?
Oh, providing public notice on the 26th so that we could hold something before March 9th. Yeah, that's probably what she meant, is trying to get an agenda posted.
When you talked to her
I
and
will.
set it up. Yeah.
I will.
But
Um,
what she said was a telephone conference on the 26th.
Yeah, we can't do that. But what we
Yeah.
can do is when we're under our meeting planning, on the agenda, is the board members can look at their calendars and we can schedule a meeting that's 10 days out and then everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. Jennifer, you want to give your report and then we'll go back to our remaining agenda items from yesterday.
Okay, so section 2036, the tasks of RVTs. As you can see in our packet, we are working on getting casting moved to indirect supervision. Nancy came up with some things that we were going to work on, but that is in progress. I'd still like to see compounding added to Section 2036 so that RVTs only would perform that. We'll talk about that at some point. And the biggest thing I have today is in the RVT community, there's some misconceptions about the fee increase. I was contacted by some people, so I wanted to clear it up. The VMB approved the fee increase in July. It's not something that was new. It's not something that was being discussed today. And then there was a telephonic meeting in December where we voted to implement the increases sooner. So that wasn't anything new that we were covering today. And then I've heard from a lot of people, there's just a lot of information that's incorrect going around. So the renewal fee for us, for RVTs, did go up $20 from $140 to $160. I've heard the one biggest misconception is that it costs more to become an RVT than it does to become a DVM. So totaling our fees, the California fees to apply, to take the exam, and then to get your initial registration, it is $510. That's a lot. And then the VTNE, I checked on AAVSB's website, but that is $315, so that would be $825 total to become a new RVT in California. For a DVM, the total would be $1,470, so that's a big misconception that it costs more for us to become licensed. And I just wanted to, for any RVTs watching who weren't able to be here today, just be very cognizant of where you get your information. Sometimes information on social media and things floating around are not always accurate. I know that CarvTub posts on their website. Nancy attends all of the meetings and she posts the minutes. I know CVMA, you can go into their membership tab on the website if you're a member and look on the RVT. There's a newsletter I believe I saw from the RVT committee. So just be aware of where you're getting your information, and information that you spread. Sometimes well-meaning individuals can put the wrong information out there. And then as far as the VTNE job analysis, which was completed, we should be seeing the new version of that exam coming out soon. So that's all I have.
Are you implying that there's fake news out there?
If you want to put it that way.
All right. Okay.
Go back to our CPEI, which was
So item 7B5.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, what is it?
Yeah.
Where are we
looking
going?
here.
Item 7B, Roman numeral 5.
Yes.
Thank you.
7B5.
All right, yesterday we had a lengthy discussion about what agency disciplinary actions would be required to be disclosed by a licensee or an applicant. There was question as to whether U.S. military should be included because the new Business and Professions Code section that we're going to be referencing, which is Section 141, doesn't specifically list U.S. military. I found another couple of regulations that are already in place that provide for disclosure of disciplinary action taken by any public agency, including a federal agency or U.S. military. So today we need to have board consideration as to whether or not we should go back and amend the previously adopted action to adopt the regulation, possibly to insert or U.S. military for disciplinary actions that are required to be disclosed. We would still be relying on Section 141. What I researched this morning was that the U.S. military operates as departments under the Department of Defense. So technically, those are public agencies, federal public agencies. So the language as it stands now wouldn't necessarily need to be revised because it includes discipline by any agency of the federal government. However, to be clear, for staff as well as applicants and licensees, it would be my recommendation to go ahead and reopen that item to amend it to include disciplinary actions by the U.S. military. So what I'm suggesting is someone making a motion to amend item 7B5, which was previously adopted.
Since I was the one making the stink about it yesterday, first of all, what time did you wake up this morning to do all this research?
Because of your love for legal research, I did it on the fly.
Then I so moved to keep the original language.
So we've already.
One that includes any disciplinary action taken by another licensing entity or authority of this state or any other state or an agency of the federal government or the United States military.
So what we included yesterday was an action by a foreign country. So the original language that was approved prior to yesterday's vote did not include foreign country disciplinary actions.
Okay.
So the board has already adopted to add that.
So
So we've already changed the language.
so can we just add or U.S. military?
That's the idea, but we would need a motion to amend the
Okay.
item previously adopted first. There has to be agreement on that, and then we can go in and adopt revised language.
Okay, so motion to
Under a
amend
motion.
previous adopted motion.
Yep.
Yes.
Second.
Dr. Sullivan seconded. Any comments from the board? Questions? Any comments from the public? Call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Now,
now a
what's our
motion,
language?
Okay.
to add U.S. military.
All right, so let me
Read it.
read the proposal. So this is on the back side of your materials under section 2042, grounds for discipline. The proposed language under paragraph A2 would read, any disciplinary action taken by any public agency in any state or territory or any, or any licensing entity or authority of this state, comma, another state, comma, any agency of the federal government or U.S. military, comma, or a foreign country.
What about territory?
Yeah, what about territory?
Territory?
We don't need territory after country.
But what about another
territory.
state or territory?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Can you read that again? too?
in any state, okay, any disciplinary action taken by any public agency in any state or territory or any licensing entity or authority of this state or another state or territory, comma, any agency of the federal government or U.S. military, comma, or a foreign country.
Why do you have to say state or territory the first time and then state or other state or territory? Can you just say state or territory both times? Hey, it's my amendment.
Yes, we can say state or territory both times. I thought I did this,
Yeah.
this last reading.
Yeah. So any disciplinary action taken by any public agency in any state or territory. So that covers it, right? Or any licensing entity or authority of this state or another state. Oh, that refers specifically to the licensing entity
Right.
in another state or territory. Okay, that makes sense. And then, or any agency of the federal government, or U.S. military, or a foreign country.
So that would be my amendment.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any questions, comments? Any comments from the public? Call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 8, discussion and consideration of board comments to the AAVSB draft policy on telehealth. So Dr. Sullivan and Tara are the ones speaking to this. Dr. Sullivan has extensive knowledge of this. He's dealt with this on the national level. And has written a good response here that I hope everyone has read. Dr. Sullivan, would you like to speak to this?
Well, it definitely was a joint effort with you, Cheryl, and Anne Marie to kind of straighten out my grammar and issues here. And Anne Marie always comes back with some corrections, and I hate it when she uses facts. The purpose of this is what I say in that first paragraph is twofold. It's to kind of update the board on what's going on at a national level, and also then to hopefully that we can get a response to AAVSB on their policy statement. When we first read the policy statement, I thought, boy, this isn't bad at all. But then when we listened to their webinar and the way they interpreted the policy statement, we were all, I think, in shock. So we kind of listed some items that we have some issues with. I don't think that we need to go through all of those. There's some common themes that we are hearing anytime there's issue with scope of practice. The one that probably upsets me the most is we need to do this because FTC is going to come in and make us do it. And at some point, I think all veterinary organizations and agency may have to address it. And I think the bottom line is veterinary, in dealing with veterinary medicine, and I'm going to use the example of dogs. Dogs are not four-legged people. There are significant differences in them medically, physiologically, and especially the way they exhibit pain. And I'm going to jump just for an example to the very last item that we've got on here on the last page, the item 10. We constantly hear that telemedicine is no different in humans. Look at pediatrics. Children can't talk, and they use telemedicine in children all the time. So, sometimes you have to do a little research, and so I became a member of the American Telemedicine Association. I'm a non-dues member, but got access to the pediatric area of telemedicine. And the American Telemedicine Association is made up predominantly of physicians and IT people to set guidelines for the different disciplines in human medicine. And not surprisingly, I found that they are, to quote them, telehealth services should not be provided to children under 2 years of age in their home or in other non-clinical settings except when the provider or the surrogate has previously established an in-person relationship. I think it's the same as veterinary medicine. I think animals, I think we do need an in-person examination to establish a VCPR, because that's what it comes down to. Proponents of including AEVSB, as I understood it, believe that in some cases you can establish a VCPR virtually. And that is something that I personally have problems with, and that's been discussed. And AVMA's policy is that is not acceptable also. So I think that's what we need to, one of the main issues that we need to focus on as we go forward, and I think we've got extremely good arguments to FTC why that initial exam needs to be in person, just like infants under 2 years of age. I think the one discussion that we do need to talk about today, first of all, if there's any questions or comments, I think maybe we could start there. And then there's one issue that Tara and I need to discuss in open session.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Jennifer?
Just a comment. I agree that the initial exam needs to be in person. I had an experience with my new horse vet who is fantastic. The horse had a vaccine reaction and she had already done the examination, so I called her. She knows I'm difficult, so she sent me a text message. Thought, well, she's sending me a text message, I'm sending her one. Sent her a picture of what I was looking at, and she responded to me, I was thinking about it. Had I never seen her, I couldn't just send a text message to a random vet I've never met. You can't tell if I've taken a picture of a horse or a Doberman. So it was really nice to have that, but I agree if you don't have that initial examination, it's not the same thing.
Kathy?
Oh, I was going to point it at Mark, but because I'm still thinking of my question.
Okay. Dr. Nunez.
I'm of the opinion that I don't think that telemedicine, I think there's very rare instances where telemedicine would be appropriate. And I always look back at an example of a cat that I once saw who came in for an eye issue. The owner saw some discharge coming out of the eye and was worried that her cat got scratched or picked up an infection. And we learned in veterinary school that I never forgot, you're not supposed to focus on the presenting complaint. You're supposed to do a full and complete physical exam for every patient, which I did. And I felt an abdominal mass, which we worked up, and it turned up to be a splenic mass, and it turned up to be a malignancy, which we were able to identify and remove before it spread anyplace else. And that's something that you would totally not be able to do in telemedicine. I think the only time where it might be appropriate is to follow up on a certain condition, but not any new condition.
Yes. Yes, I once saw a dog for a second deworming and it ended up in a C-section.
I have a comment on page 4 at the very top. Cannot is 2 words. Isn't that supposed to be 1? Where it says a physician cannot prescribe, is that 2 words or 1?
Can be either.
Oh, it can be either, okay.
And
That was, hey, everything else, it's complicated, this. Yeah, well, my input is, I'm with you guys. I think that you gotta have some established, I think that, once a vet has a relationship with you, whether it's texting, pictures, with all this electronic stuff these days, absolutely we should be able to do as much as we can back and forth. And I do that, I have in the past with vets, and then they say, time to bring her in, time to bring them in, and that's it. You're at the end of the line, time to bring them in, because it's beyond what you can take a picture of and describe. So I saw this as a complicated issue. I agree with Dick, everything everybody has said. Really, that's my input. So, is that better than just cannot? Okay.
Tara.
I had some notes on the model policy outside of what Dr. Sullivan and I may be discussing later. I just wanted to bring these items up because I don't think this model is fleshed out enough.
You're talking about the AABSB policy. That's perfect.
The first issue I identified was that although telehealth and telemedicine are defined in the model, they begin to use those terms interchangeably within what's authorized. And they're using telehealth, which is the education and information definition, when I think they mean telemedicine. which is more particular and gets at the heart of the scope of use of telemedicine. So I think that needs to be reevaluated and cinched up. Additionally, it looks like this is relying somewhat on the human telemedicine model, but they're using the term site, S-I-T-E. And this model policy defines telemedicine to mean the use of medical information exchanged from one site to another via electronic communications. Although this is the same verbiage as the AVMA model and similar to the human health telehealth model. Site could actually mean the originating site where the VCPR was established or where the patient is located at a distant site where or at a distant site where the veterinarian is located out of state. So I think site, and further, a lot of people understand the term site, S-I-T-E, to mean one electronic site or another, not the physical location of either the animal patient or the veterinarian. So the term site needs to be clarified or a different term needs to be used. Also, the definition of telemedicine uses a patient's clinical health status. Although this is the same as the AVMA, this term could be broadened outside the scope of one medical event or condition to mean the patient's long-term or changing health status. And I know one of the considerations is that it's a small emergency. It's one event, not the continuing care of the patient. So I think clinical health status needs to be looked at as well. Then I have other thoughts, but I'll discuss that with Dr. Sullivan.
Dr. Nunez.
Dr. Sullivan, I wonder if you could comment on the emphasis they have that the patient and the other person on the other end of the telehealth portion, the DVM or the RVT, needs to be licensed within the same state as the patient. Is that for regionally specific diseases, or what's the emphasis there?
There's a debate about that too.
Yeah, this is the discussion we're going to have on the board as soon as we get finished with these comments. And
Okay.
we're going to go into that discussion in detail.
Okay.
Kathy. I wanted to commend Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Waterhouse, and Tara for the memo. I think it really points out a lot of the issues that we're concerned about. I had a couple of things on their model policy as well that they that I don't know if we're including here, but just thoughts that I had about looking at their model and thinking that a couple other things need to be added to it. And I believe in telemedicine when there's a current practicing, a primary vet, and he's seen or she's seen the patient. I think it's tough to just, the online calling randomly worries me, and I know it's a big business. It is a big business now, but I also think because they're animals and not human beings, that there's too much subjective play that the client, the owner, can have in describing it to the televet. So, but I had a couple of things on the continuity of care. Well, let me go through a couple of these things in the model. Okay. And the continuity of care, is there any way to, if we're going to talk to the AAVSB about theirs, require the televet to forward all the information to the primary vet if there is one after a televet conference?
I think that they do address it in that they state that the record keeping needs to be readily available to the client.
To the client.
So they can take it to the primary.
Okay, so they say a client, but I was just trying to do vet to vet, but okay, I see.
Yeah.
All right. And then one other thing I thought of, can these vets can order, these televets under this model can order, do prescriptions, order lab work things like that?
I'm sure they can order lab work.
It's confusing in this way.
It is confusing. It was confusing on the webinar
Yeah.
as to whether they can prescribe drugs.
Well, I was on the webinar too. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And the only thing on the human side, the only thing I have found is that, and I've got it cited there, that telemedicine cannot prescribe controlled drugs. That has to be an in-person exam. But they can prescribe anything else. And I had the impression, and I thought it was a bullet point, that a veterinarian on a telemedicine communication could not prescribe medication, which totally defeats the definition of VCPR. Then you have to have two different definitions, one for information and one for, one for diagnosing and one for diagnosing and treating. And I think that's, I don't think that's a good policy. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think we can have two definitions because that creates multiple loopholes.
Yeah, because on the prescribing, that's what I was concerned with. Does a vet hold the liability if the client tells him the animal's on X, Y, and Z, forgets that she's on, A, B, and C as well, and then he prescribes something or she that has a problem with that? I assume televets assume this kind of potential risk that they're not knowing everything if they're going to prescribe.
I think there's a huge disclaimer that the client is buying into.
I think you have to. That's the other thing I was going to say. On the registering of complaints, it seems like these telemedicine offerings or on webs or sites or wherever should have clear and clean information on their website about where and how to file complaints in all the states that they may service. And it doesn't really say that here. It says, you should be able to, a clear mechanism to register complaints, but these things are regional or nationwide. So
what it does specify is that the veterinarian's title or location and
right.
licensing information.
And I think licensing, the license number, et cetera. There should be something else about filing complaints, I think, that's clearer for that too. These people are less connected than going into a brick and mortar vet. So anyway, those are my thoughts on their thing.
Should we discuss it?
So the goal here today is to come up with, Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Waterhouse, and I worked on the statement that you have before you outlining some of the concerns. Primarily where I still see there's a great deal of confusion in telemedicine, and not just in veterinary medicine, but in particular, even some of the human medicine models, is the jurisdiction of the license when practicing. And while we're in the state of California, whoever's providing services to the consumers in the state of California would have to be licensed in the state of California, regardless of where that veterinarian resides. There is some, in particular, challenges with veterinary medicine because of the VCPR, and that VCPR appearing to be portable, in that Dr. Sullivan and I went back and forth about, well, if I treated somebody in California, I was licensed in California, and they were only here for a short period of time, and they went to Oregon, I as a veterinarian should still be able to treat that person via telemedicine who's now in Oregon. I can't tell you that that's okay, because in Oregon, they may have provisions that say if you're providing services to a client that resides in this state, you shall be licensed in this state or territory. And regardless of the fact that you established a VCPR in California, that VCPR may not transfer to Oregon. I think what would be important for AAVSB to try and, I think, pull together the states is maybe create a state compact that would address cross-state jurisdiction when it comes to telemedicine. The states would all have to buy into that. That would have to be something that was covered in your regulations, but basically it would say, for the purposes of telemedicine and establishing a VCPR, the states enter into a compact which gives veterinarians the authority to treat if they established the VCPR in the state of origin where the client resided. They could continue that treatment either for a certain period of time or perhaps for just within that VCPR for that particular health problem that was being addressed. And that state compact would then address cross-state license jurisdiction. And perhaps that's something we can add to our memo to make that clear, because there was a great deal of confusion on the webinar, and I thought I understood it, and that, hey, you would have to be licensed in whatever state you're providing telemedicine. But then there's a disadvantage to the client. So the client says, I'm going to go to veterinarian in California. This veterinarian's going to treat my animal. And then when I pick up and go to wherever I go next, now I have zero continuity of care, because I can't reach out to that veterinarian anymore because they might not be licensed in Wisconsin. And my current veterinarian in Wisconsin, doesn't have those medical records at this point, or hasn't been able to consult with that veterinarian. So there's an expectation on the part of the pet owner that there is going to be some continuity of care when they've received services under a VCPR, because there was an in-person examination and then a continued VCPR through telemedicine. So we need to make sure we shore this up so that we're not leaving the clients and the patients in the lurch because they happen to cross a state border. And it is very complicated, but there are other compacts that exist in nursing. I think medicine has compacts to allow for limited cross-border practice under, a very structured parameter, and telemedicine could be one of those.
Yeah, and I have had a couple of examples, but I think the one that I go back to, and maybe I do illegal things, but if I have a client that's traveling and is, in the Midwest and ran out of Lasix, I've called up the pharmacy and ordered Lasix for them. And so how would something like, even in this present day and age, is that not telemedicine and continuation of care? And
Yeah, by telephone.
yeah.
Old-fashioned way.
Telephone is part of telemedicine.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
It's in the, yes.
I thought it was just telephone.
So are you
Well,
saying that by
make
calling a pharmacist in another state to refill a prescription is not legal at this point in time?
Well, and you're the original treating veterinarian?
The people are my clients traveling.
Oh, no, because we provide for that in regulations.
But what about the state that they're in? That's what you're talking about.
Well, I don't know if you're violating their law, but you're not violating ours.
Okay.
So I can't answer as to whether or not you're violating the other state laws.
And they can't take your license away.
They can just tell on you where we are.
Well, and that, this is our conversation.
Right.
This is our
Right.
argument. And what I'm saying is, in my example was a veterinarian who is in California. Their client is 40 miles away in Nevada, and that person wants to establish that veterinarian as their primary veterinarian. The continuation of care, I think, should be allowed with that person going back home and me calling them up and seeing how things are going down the road. And that's telemedicine, or monitoring blood sugars with them doing at home if it's diabetic. I think, to me, the key is, where's the VCPR established? And now if that client has a problem and wants to file a complaint, they get on the internet and file a complaint with California where my license is. That's reasonable.
But would it be okay for that person 2 years later that's in Oregon to still be, getting help from you?
The VCPR limit is 1 year.
Okay.
Or a new
So
problem.
there's already a time limit in the
Maximum
VC.
time I can refill a prescription is 1 year or less, depending on the problem. If the problem's more critical, that time frame shortens.
Okay.
The problem I see here is that the definition, as you describe it, is the practice occurs where the VCPR is established.
Right.
And it doesn't. The practice occurs where the patient receives the care, at the time the patient receives the care. And that's how telemedicine is defined for,
And that's what it says in
yeah,
here, too.
for medical fields and everyone else. So that's the disagreement we're having, is that the VCPR itself is not how the practice is defined. It's defined wherever the patient is receiving the services from the veterinarian.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, that's
opposite.
true for medicine. And that's kind of a general application across licensing laws.
But
Which
to,
was-
to address that specific point, Dr. Sullivan is talking about a continuation of a certain condition happening at a distant location. So there may be a distinction made between a telemedicine act occurring on a new condition versus a telemedicine act happening on a previously diagnosed ongoing condition. I think that there could be a distinction made between that.
That's a great point.
So here's, and that could be true. What I'm suggesting is that you address this with the AAVSB because right now we cannot predict that if you believe that the continuity of care is not an issue in another state and your client's now in wherever and you're continuing to treat because you happen to establish a VCPR in California, your license may be in jeopardy because that state could file an unlicensed
Right.
activity claim with
Right.
California. It's something that just needs to be made clear because I don't think everybody understands it the way.
No,
Is this
they
is
don't.
this 4-page document our response to AAVSB?
Yes.
Okay. So can we include that point in this
Yes.
document?
Yes.
Well, what I would, what the discussion today focuses around is how we address item 4. That's where we're having a difference of opinion here. So I think, so I think now we've kind of divided up into two areas. One is when the VCPR is established. I think it's established where I think the VCPR is established where the veterinarian has done the examination. Then the second component of this is continuation of care. And, you know, I think the two things have to be
Correct.
have to be addressed in this item.
Correct.
I would agree.
Okay.
Which is what I just said.
Yes. But this is where we're doing it.
So we need to make some amendments here because what we say is another way to look at this may be the veterinarian must be licensed in the state where the VCPR is established. But that may not be where the client resides. So that's the kind of difference of opinion or where the client is being treated. So if you look above, the way the AAVSB has defined it, they said patient lives, but that's not what they meant. It's perhaps what they meant was it is that the veterinarian must be licensed where the patient is being treated. And then I think we confuse that issue to say another way to look at this may be that's a complete diversion from how they're establishing where the practice is occurring.
Well,
So
instead of focusing on the patient or the veterinarian, should we focus on the condition, the ailment?
No.
no,
That's a
Because-
separate issue.
Because
I think it's the
That's an issue.
differentiation is where did the initial visit occur? Was it exactly what you just said? Was it something that happened at home and now I'm traveling? Or is it something that, you know, was established through the telemedicine in a different state? There is two different paths here. It's clear, and I don't think you can treat them one way.
so if Dr. Sullivan is treating a condition treating a pet for a heart disease, and his patient is in Alabama, and the dog is needs a refill of Lasix, but he also wants to ask Dr. Sullivan about an ear infection. Dr. Sullivan can only address the heart condition.
Right, and would
You
have
can't
to
address
send
the ear
them
infection.
somewhere for the ear
I'm not even sure I
infection.
can address that anymore.
well, I don't know, maybe you can. And here's the other thing, according to our definition of what has to happen for telemedicine to occur legally, the VCPR has to be established in person.
But I don't think
So,
he should be able to.
Let me finish. The VCPR has to be established in person. So that would shore up any problems we're having about the practice occurring where the patient is and where the VCPR is established, because both people are going to be there. It's what happens from that point on.
Yeah.
Now that's by California's definition. AAVSB suggests that the VCPR could be established telephonically.
Right.
And in that case, now we have a licensed jurisdiction issue.
Yes.
Because if the veterinarian is establishing a VCPR in California because the vet's in California, but the patient is somewhere else, I'm fairly certain that you're going to have a license
Right.
where that patient is.
Which is what they say.
Which is
in
what they
the-
say. So
in their
I don't think
licensure.
it's as clean as we think it is according to their
Yeah.
model. And
Right.
that's what we need to address.
Right.
I also,
I think the AAVSB is looking, in their guidelines, it's about, we're talking about, it should be it's under the same umbrella, but it's kind of two different situations. You have a telemedicine entity with vets on the phone or on computer all over the place dealing with folks that call in for questions and problems. In that case, they're saying the vet has to have appropriate licensure wherever that client is calling from. But then we're talking about Dr. Sullivan, where you have a VCPR and it is a patient of yours, and they are now traveling somewhere else, which is slightly different from these online, sort of distant telemedicine or teledocs or whatever you would call it. So they write this up as if it was a business that just had, it specifically says the client is located at the time. The practice of veterinary medicine occurs where the client is located at the time telehealth is used, and then therefore the vets have to be licensed in whatever jurisdiction that person is calling from.
Right.
And so, we're talking a little bit of two different things,
Right.
right? Continuing
I think there's
care.
actually three things. So I
Oh,
think
maybe.
there's, where does the VCPR occur? We should talk about that, but also when, are there time parameters on this that we should set in place? And then are there condition parameters we should set in place? If you've got a VCPR established for one condition, but then another condition pops up, then we need to, so I think there's three things that we need to kind of address one at a time.
But my point is, in Dr. Sullivan's now famous case here, the dog with a heart condition and an ear infection. If it's new ear infection, I don't think that Dr. Sullivan would be better qualified to treat that ear than a teledoc would, because it's a new condition. So why should his VCPR still be valid to treat that ear infection?
It's not.
We agree to that. It's not. The VCPR is for one condition for a maximum of 1 year, or shorter if the condition is more serious. Up to 1 year, I believe the verbiage is. But if it's a new problem, you've got to reestablish a new VCPR.
And by California's definition, that would be in person.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Tara,
Yeah.
maybe insert some legal opinion here.
I think we need to be clear about what the model policy covers, and it's electronic communications. It is not telephonic. Right.
Well, I
So it's
understand.
not calling up the vet asking for advice. When we look at under licensure, it's veterinarians who treat through online services sites.
Some of those you can chat with.
Yeah,
I
that's
was thinking, we're talking about
Sure.
calling your own vet.
Right, exactly. And I'm just making sure we're clear on the distinction between telephone calls and the use of electronic means.
The phone's not electronic?
No, because under this policy, it's separated. If you look on page 1, under definitions, consultation means receiving advice or assistance in person, telephonically, electronically, or by any other method of communication. Then you go down to telemedicine, and it's only information exchange from one site to another via electronic communications. They're making a distinction between telephonic and electronic. It's not included.
I'm not sure if
Well,
they intended. to.
Yeah,
I don't think they did either.
Well,
think so.
these are the things that,
Yes.
need to be highlighted because it's, we think it applies, but it would not under this language.
Well, what's your definition of electronic communication? Is that like FaceTime or what is
Well, it's not my definition that matters. The point is that they're creating a distinction between telephonic and electronic.
But let me clear this up. They're using the term telehealth, and that's why they use the term telehealth, which if you look at their definition of telehealth, is an overarching term that encompasses all uses of technology geared to remotely deliver health information education. And that's their use of the term in their policy. Our use of the term telemedicine and their use of the term telemedicine may be two different things, and that may be something we'd like to address.
And the terms are being interchanged. So telemedicine is a smaller set of
Subset, yeah.
information rather than
Yes.
just education and general topics,
Yeah.
which is the other problem.
I also thought that the telemedicine language was specific to the electronic transfer of files or data or whatever, as opposed to my site is my home computer or my phone where I'm texting an unknown, telehealth person. So that's where I took it when it said one site where medical information is exchanged. So it is true, it's a little misleading, that's for sure. And that's why they want feedback, obviously.
Yeah.
I think the other point that we're also making is that their policy statement is quite vague, and they say, yeah, we want it vague because we want to allow the states to have flexibility. And I don't think that's the role of a leadership organization. I think it is to make specific recommendations so there's consistency.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I
they
think
can't
that's
guarantee consistency because every state is going to do what they need to do based on their own practice act. I do think it's important, though, that we perhaps suggest some sort of interstate compact, because that would then lend itself to consistency. So that veterinarians who are providing services, and perhaps that distinction about, the treating veterinarian who already has an established relationship with the client being able to pick up the phone, regardless if the client is traveling to multiple states, maybe they do intend to exempt that, or that doesn't mean telemedicine.
They haven't discussed that.
But I think we need, if we bring it up,
Yes,
they
yes.
might think to discuss that,
Yeah.
because that's a common practice
Yeah.
that you wouldn't feel is telemedicine at this point. You would perhaps deem that as, I'm taking care of my client.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think you can amend our response under item 4 to address telemedicine in the vein of, establishing a VCPR and then that person, returning to their state of origin, whether that VCPR continues to be in effect, regardless of the licensing jurisdiction. And the second point to that is continuity of care that may require things like telephone calls or filling prescriptions. Was that intended to be covered under telemedicine, or is that something completely distinct and apart from this policy?
That's right.
And then another area we can add is just some clarification on the definition.
Right.
Which would feed into that other discussion, whether telemedicine, or their definition of telehealth would include telephone calls.
Yes.
I thought that telehealth did.
Well,
And I have to confess that I've done the same thing that Dr. Sullivan did, calling in prescriptions to other states for my patients.
I have as well.
As a consumer who, you would want
That's
your
just
vet
normal.
to be able to
Yeah.
do that. Your doctor can do it into Walgreens in
Yes.
Kansas, so. I mean, seriously.
So maybe if it's agreement with everybody, the next step is for Cheryl and staff and I to work on item 4. And then I didn't see this as necessarily this format going to AVSB, but a letter with these a letter written better than this going to AVSB. This is just the concept of what we need to have in there.
so if we could get this done early next week, and then I can get it off before.
Yes. the
Okay.
deadline,
Yes, the
yeah.
deadline was the 28th.
Well, they know they're giving us
Some extra
a
time?
couple
Because
weeks,
of-
but
Okay.
that doesn't work for us anyway. So
Yeah.
we're going to go ahead and get it done.
Yeah.
And Tara, I'll resource you a little bit on that as well.
So are there any other areas that we need to discuss in addition to item 4?
I fully agree with teletriage. I think that's appropriate.
So as far as the VCPR being established about the location, that's covered in point 4.
Right.
As far as when, the time parameters, is that covered in 4, or do you need a little more language talking about that?
Well, we know what it is here, but
Yes.
we may need to.
Yeah, I
You may
think
want
we
to
have to.
spell that out
Yeah, so that's,
for time parameters.
okay.
Are you talking about time frame within the VCPR?
Within the VCPR.
Okay.
And then last sentence, however, if a new medical problem arises, a new VCPR must be established. I think
That's true for all states.
that covers
Yes.
that part as far as conditions.
Yeah. So do you want to call for a motion for the letter?
Okay, so can we have a motion?
I'll move to adopt and transfer the letter when
Thank you.
it's completely redrafted.
Second, Judy seconds. Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the public?
Oh, I think
Sorry,
Kathy
Kathy,
had-
did you?
I just wanted
Raise
to
your hand.
add one quick thing, just because it's sort of an aside, but I'm on a subcommittee of the AAVSB about things that the AAVSB can do as an association, nationwide association for member boards. And what Anne Marie mentioned as far as a interstate compact type of situation is right, the kinds of things they're looking to
Right.
try and see what states need. So.
Yeah. Fits in nicely.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yeah, I've seen that mentioned a couple of times, but in references, I'm not sure I'm in favor of interstate compact unless it's restricted to a telemedicine case. Is that what?
This
Yes.
would be specifically for telemedicine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And only if we like it.
Any comments from the public? Call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler?
Yes.
Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Thank you. So now we do need to talk about our telehealth language, or excuse me, our telemedicine language under tab A, and whether or not we need to, well, there's two options we can explore here. Do we need to make any changes to this language today before we continue to file that? Or do we need to wait because we're still working out this, kind of global policy with AAVSB, because that may impact what our language says here.
Well,
Dr. Sullivan?
I think, number one, I think we need to move on this so we have something, and I think it's going to be 2 or 3 years or before everything gets ironed out, and
Yeah.
then we have to come back and address it. But I don't want to sit on this any longer.
Okay. Tara?
I agree with that. I think we should move forward. Tara?
I have two comments on the language. One is because of the interstate use of telemedicine, even though the Business and Professions Code does a pretty decent job of defining the limitations on a veterinarian who's not licensed in California and how they can consult. I'm concerned that this could be used by a corporate practice situation where there's a corporate owner of the practice. They contract out for telemedicine services. That contract authorizes veterinarians who are not the establishing VCPR veterinarian. So I'm thinking that it may be appropriate to just make sure that the telemedicine communication to the client must go through or be controlled by the veterinarian who has established the VCPR. That way it's not just a general practice reliance on a VCPR that exists within the practice. The information must go through or be controlled by the veterinarian.
So is your suggestion, just to make it clear, telemedicine communication shall be controlled by and through the veterinarian who has established the veterinary client-patient relationship?
Right, and I would just specify that it's the communication to the client.
So you're saying the VCPR can be established by the corporation and not the veterinarian?
I'm saying they could rely on the established VCPR by one of their employed veterinarians, contract the telemedicine out, and then the VCPR is just kind of transferred, and whoever is providing the telemedicine is doing so as an agent of the VCPR.
And I think that's the models right now.
Dr. Sullivan?
Don't we have that covered under the VCPR language that, for example, on filling a prescription, it can be done if it's within the same practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for the purposes of filling the prescription. But I don't know, based on telemedicine, if we think about like the teledoc models where someone is establishing the initial exam and contact with the patient, and then anyone that works for that company can then provide telemedicine services to that patient because they've already done the exam and that exam's been established. It doesn't have to be that same doctor that's continuing the care.
Dr. Nunez?
And that's almost equivalent. If I've established a VCPR with a patient and I refer to a specialist, that specialist is establishing a new VCPR.
Right. Yes.
And so the telemedicine doctor, even though it's acting on my behalf, if my company has contracted out to Teladoc, I can see where it would be appropriate if they're addressing a current condition that had already been diagnosed, but not a new condition.
Right. I think the problem goes back to the same problem we have with the prescription language. If that doctor is on vacation in Europe and can't be reached, then nobody else can give advice to that client. It doesn't seem practical. I think if it's from the same practice and they have access to the physical medical records, or electronic records.
I think what they're talking about is a practice contracting out.
Yeah.
So it's going to a call center, not a call center,
Right.
a veterinary call center. And that I assume there's liability on somewhere here, but that anyone at that call center, because the practice has a VCPR, is different from somebody in your own office or whatever, I would think.
Yeah, so can it be written so that we
So-
cover, veterinarians within the same practice, but not, a contract?
Yeah,
Well, Tara's
Corporation?
I agree with
Another-
Tara's point.
language might.
I agree with Tara's point, and I'm sure she'll come up with the right language.
Well, I think that, if the idea is that the statement be controlled by the veterinarian, that might be sufficient because that veterinarian is still supervising the case. They're still involved. It's not, these decisions aren't just being made by individuals who don't have access to the files.
You see where it really gets
Yeah.
tricky is in the corporate practices that are electronic. You could have someone at another facility, another building,
Looking at the records.
looking up the record, and that may be okay, but we have to be prepared for that.
I guess where I think you're covered because it says a VCPR relationship. Excuse me. Telemedicine shall be conducted within an existing VCPR, which, if you go back to, as you mentioned, 2032.1, it talks about who can assume responsibility for the animal. 2032.15. And perhaps in some of those situations where you are deferring to another veterinarian because the situation you mentioned, the original treating veterinarian isn't available, that may be appropriate. So I don't know that you want to limit it to it has to go through the existing veterinarian, all communications. that
we
might
could
be too limiting.
Well,
If
you
we could
you
say
couldn't if you're in Europe.
Right.
If I mean, obviously, if I call the hospital and my vet is on vacation, they're going to say, "Oh, there's 3 people on backup for her. So what's this an issue? Oh, oncology. Boom, it's this person that's the backup."
Yeah.
No,
Dr.
yeah,
Diaz.
that's
Dr. Sullivan mentioned that if a treating veterinarian is on vacation, then it would be appropriate for someone at the same facility with access to the records to be able to refill the medicine or consult. But here's the thing, the next update on VCA's electronic medical records is going to be connecting all the VCA hospitals together.
within the same practice.
No, with all the VCA
Across the
practices.
country.
So if Fluffy goes to a VCA in California, Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee, all of those visits are going to be combined into one medical record. And so
That's what
if I made the VCPR, made the diagnosis, all those other states are going to have access to the records. So can they consult on the case?
Dr. Sullivan.
Before you gave that perfect example, I was thinking if we could restrict it to the same practice.
But I don't know that you need to because you already have that.
Okay.
So, a VCPR may continue to exist in the absence of client communication when, and then there's a VCPR was established with the original veterinarian and another designated veterinarian serves in the absence.
Yeah. That's
The designated veterinarian has resumed responsibility for making medical judgments, has sufficient knowledge of the animal to initiate at least a general or preliminary diagnosis, has access to the medical records. I mean, it's already there.
That's what I thought.
So I think we might be okay with this language for now. You may need to tweak it down the road, but I don't know that we're there yet.
I think at the very least, it's important to add notice that, this has to get back to the originating veterinarian so that they're still maintaining the treatment themselves rather than it's being shopped out to other veterinarians who are not familiar with the physical treatment.
But I think it covers that if it says shall be conducted within an existing VCPR, and we've already defined what that is. So unless you want to then say pursuant to 2032 point, I mean, I think that
you don't
it's
have to do
there. Unless you want to cross-reference 2032 point, whatever it is, 15, 2032.1 and 2032.15.
This is 2032.1.
If the suggestion is to leave it as is and not add a communication control requirement, I'm fine with that. I just think that, the discussion should be had. So that moving forward, the board is familiar with this concept, and if there's a problem down the line,
Yeah.
you're familiar.
I think we're okay, but I think as this whole telemedicine evolves over the next few years or 5, 6 years or 20 years, we're going to have to make adjustments.
Exactly.
In light of what we've talked about, I think there might be some problems with this language that was proposed. It says telemedicine shall be conducted within an existing VCPR relation, with the exception of emergency, until the patient. But then on the next page it says, for the purpose of this section, telemedicine shall mean the mode of delivering animal health care services via communication technologies to facilitate the diagnosis, consultation, treatment, and care management of the patient. Should diagnosis and treatment be removed from that sentence? Because we've said that a new condition can't be diagnosed and treated. We can consult, we can continue to do care management,
Well, you can
but
treat.
diagnosis and treatment I don't think should be in that last sentence.
Well, you can treat
Aren't you
by
treating?
telemedicine, but
Diagnose.
you
So it's
probably can't
diagnosis.
diagnose because that has to happen
Okay.
in person.
That's what
Yeah.
we're saying.
So maybe diagnosis should be removed
That
from that
might be
sentence.
I'm glad you brought up the definition. I don't think communication technologies is very clear, mainly because when researching this issue in general, we're adding a reference to BPC section 2290.5, which is under the Medical Practice Act, and that's that section is being added because that provides a definition of telehealth. And we're clarifying that for veterinary medicine, this is what that means. When I looked up the bill that established 2290.5, the Senate Committee on Business Professions and Economic Development Committee analysis says that neither a phone conversation nor an electronic mail message between a healthcare practitioner and patient constitutes telemedicine. So, you know, because we're looking at the model policy and that's not clear whether or not telephonic communication is included, I think that we need to at least discuss whether or not we need to clarify communication technologies.
Well, what would be a better word?
We definitely want to include telephone.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Tara, I have a question on in our own situations with telehealth on human medicine. I don't understand. You are calling a place, you are talking to somebody, and they are giving you advice, or go to the hospital immediately, or they're giving you something, and it is over the phone in many cases. So, but you're saying it's prohibited in?
No, I'm saying the restrictions on telemedicine and all the requirements don't apply to telephonic and email communication.
Oh, just restrictions.
Yeah, all the provisions for telemedicine, all the requirements. So telephonic and email communication would just be covered as an inpatient or an in-person communication.
Morse code
Even
would
though
be
you're not
considered
speaking to your doctor.
communication technology, right? Morse code via telegraph.
I think what we could do is, actually, if I'm, as usual, operating on the fly, the AAVSB model policy lists out under consultation telephonically, electronically, or by any other method of communication.
You want to replace that for communication technologies?
We could do electronic communication because we're not trying to say that other methods of communication that include in person. We're trying to get at when it's not in person, it's telephonic, electronic, or other electronic means.
Shall we replace communication technologies with that?
Well,
And then cross
Telephonically or
I think electronic communication can include telephonically, but I'm looking at other provisions where it does. The other consideration here is there any, and for human medicine, this is why they use communication technologies, because they are using technologies on the other side with the patient. So whether it be some sort of scan or probe or something, there might be the doctor is on one side, and then on the other side of the communication there is a patient, and there may be a medical assistant or an aide or someone else who is engaging with the patient, and that happens in human medicine. Does it happen in animal medicine where you would have a veterinarian on one side, on the other side you're going to have the patient, and could you have an RVT or a veterinary assistant or someone else? And there may be technologies being used. It may not just be a conversation. You may be saying palpate the, I don't know if you would ask the RVT to palpate the stomach, but you may be saying, can you look in the ears and tell me if you see any swelling or redness or whatever? So that's not just a communication, that is a technology. And I don't know that you want to limit it to just being able to talk to the
No.
yeah.
We want it as broad as possible.
Yeah.
And we don't care, once the VCPR.
I wouldn't mess with it.
Well,
okay, so
I don't know if I would agree with. Would I make a diagnosis based on what
No, it's not
another
a
person's
diagnosis,
eyes?
it's treatment.
Okay.
Yeah, not a diagnosis.
You have to have the VCPR.
Okay.
So I think what would be important with this rulemaking file is to make a statement within the initial statement of reasons to explain that the board is using communication technologies to include telephonic or electronic means.
Okay.
Did you capture that, Amanda? Okay. But we do need to make a motion if we're going to remove the word diagnosis after to facilitate.
We have to remove the diagnosis.
Yeah. This language was already adopted by the board, so this would be an amendment to just remove the diagnosis from the language, if that's what the board feels is appropriate.
Okay. I thought we adopted E, but not F. Did we adopt F?
What was your question?
I know we adopted E, but was
We-
F adopted too?
Yes.
Yeah, we adopted all of it at the last meeting.
All right.
So is
So
there a
moved.
motion?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
Okay.
I thought you said so moved.
I said
so
so
moved.
moved
So Dr.
to remove
Sullivan.
the diagnosis.
Tara's,
Move.
you want to read it?
Sure.
Yes.
The motion is to approve the proposed regulatory changes as modified, direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package, notice the proposed text for a 45-day comment period, and if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, adopt the proposed regulatory changes as modified.
The modification, just to be clear, is in the language, and it's under 2032.1, veterinary client-patient relationship, subdivision subdivision F. For the purposes of this section, telemedicine shall mean the mode of delivering animal healthcare services via communication technologies to facilitate consultation, treatment, and care management of the patient.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Did Tara mention that communication technology should include telephone?
That will go in the ISOR. So the initial statement of reasons that accompanies the language, it will explain that for the purposes of this, yeah.
Okay.
Any comments from the public? Call for the vote.
Dr. Waterhouse?
Yes.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Jennifer Laredo?
Yes.
Kathy Bowler? Judy Mancuso?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, are we all done with telehealth?
Mhm.
Okay, moving on to agenda item number 9, the MDC report. And Dr. Klingborg is not here today, so Dr. Sullivan is going to give that report, and then we'll need an approval of the report.
And I think the members should have a copy of the report that Dr. Klingborg actually had printed up, and there should be some additional copies. If not, I can provide them.
Okay, we had a meeting yesterday and the following items were discussed. The first one was a update on the complaint process from the complaint process audit subcommittee, which is Bill Grant and Jeff Pollard. Jeff gave the report. His comments were that there was a significant improvement in the expert witnesses' reports over the past 2 years, and attributed a lot of that to the expert witness training. He did suggest that he and Bill thought that some of the reports were too technical, that maybe we needed to use a little more common language so that it would be clearer to the judge. Next item was a report and update on the ongoing work on developing minimum standards for shelter medicine. There was a report about the stakeholders meeting on December 8th. That information was presented, and then we kind of went over what has progressed over the last 2 years, and committee work at various times by Dave Johnson, Jeff Pollard, and Alan Drusis. So there's a number of issues. There's actually 9 different issues that need to be developed, and kind of where we're at now is another subcommittee to take what we did in the premises task force, and which I'm going to be reporting on next, and use that model to develop, literally develop a minimum standard for shelter medicine. The next item was a report on CVMA's task force on minimum standards. That task force met for 7 days and finally came up with a different format. Basically, what we have in code right now is Section 2030, and it was decided to, instead of have one overreaching section and then having subdivisions of what other types of practices need to do or couldn't do, it was finally decided, let's just put the minimum standards for each type of practice and for the premises permit. So what was presented was the minimum standards for small animal fixed, large animal fixed, small animal mobile, animal vaccination practice, small animal house call practice, large animal ambulatory. And then, as I said, the next task will be for the shelter animal practice. So, for example, if a veterinarian is only going to get a premises permit for vaccination practice, he can go to Section 2030.3 and know exactly what he or she needs to do. So,
Can I?
What's the difference between small animal mobile and small animal house call?
A small animal mobile is a vehicle that is inspected and has higher standards than a mobile because they'll have the ability to do surgery and do exams within the mobile unit.
Wow.
Whereas a house call practice is the veterinarian is going in the house and doing the practice in the house and doesn't.
Judy.
Could the ambulance that Mark brought up yesterday fall within or have its own category? Because there are a lot of animal ambulances. I actually paid, what was it, $800 to get a cat from Irvine to San Diego in oxygen in an ambulance. And, you know, I thought an ambulance. And it turned out to be kind of a pickup truck with an oxygen tank and a carrier that the oxygen is, you know, kind of in this carrier. Wasn't really what I thought an ambulance might be, being human ambulance. And then I thought to myself, is there any regulation? And I asked him, what are your qualifications? Are you credentialed at all? And he was an RVT. So, I don't know. I think this kind of animal ambulance thing is rogue, and I think we need to bring it in here somewhere.
I don't think it fits under that definition, but maybe that's something we need to look at. Tara, can you, in your opinion, would that fit under?
No, I don't think it would.
I think it's a new one that needs to be put
Right.
on the list.
It's definitely something that the board can discuss at another meeting, and I believe that the issue had come up yesterday. So I'm pretty sure Anne Marie has a note under future items to see if the board wants to add that for a future meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, there's got to be some standards. Thank you.
No, I think it can be. I think there's.
Okay. All right.
And so this is moved forward to our board at our next meeting. It was approved by the MDC to go forward.
Yeah.
And the last item I have was a supervision, was looking at Section 2035, duties of a supervising veterinarian. This also will be coming to us at the next meeting, and it's adding item D, which says a supervising veterinarian shall not delegate or any allowable animal health care task to an RVT permit holder or VA who does not have the necessary 1, extensive clinical skills, and 2, demonstrates competency. So that'll be coming to our board next meeting.
How is that competency demonstrated?
That's up to the veterinarian's license.
Any questions, comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, at this point, we're going to take a restroom break and be back in 15 minutes. Moving, I have to repeat that since it didn't show up on the microphone. Agenda item number 12, public comment for items not on the agenda. Do any members of the public have any agenda items for future meetings?
Yes.
Well, this is public comment.
Yeah.
Okay, then moving on to agenda item number 18, presentation regarding assessment of rehabilitation for substance abuse disorders, and Stephanie's here to speak to us.
Just real quick, and sorry, this was my fault. Under the public comment, no one here had any public comments. We did have several public comments in the packet.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. But what these are things we already heard about the tactical medical rescue operations plan for legislative change yesterday. So that comment was kind of incorporated in our legislative discussion yesterday under 1776. There are two additional public comments. You can still approach Steph. There are two additional public comments in the packet. One has to do with a licensing situation from an individual who practiced in Mexico. Christine Long wrote a letter to the board regarding the board's kind of reciprocity, I guess, provisions, excuse me, losing it here. And then the other comment has to do with a suggestion regarding changing the requirements for direct supervision of a veterinary, registered veterinary technician. So this has to do with dental procedures, and this comment has to do with the board providing greater prescription under the direct supervision of an RVT. And if either of these things are of interest to the board to put on a future meeting agenda, we can cover that under future meeting agendas. But I just wanted to make sure we reference the two comments we received from the public in the packet.
Thank you. So, Stephanie, you're here as a representative Maximus.
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have?
Sure. I hope you can all hear me. I am delighted that you are interested in this topic and it asks for some training. I have the privilege of being your clinical case manager for the Veterinary Medical Board's diversion program. And just a little bit about my background. I'm a registered nurse, obviously an old one, going on 40 years. And I'm a CARN, a Certified Addictions Registered Nurse. That's an international certification through the International Nurses Society on Addiction since '97. I'm also a licensed advanced alcohol and drug counselor through the California Consortium of Addiction Programs and Professionals, their certification board, which is international. So I am pleased to be here. I was told that you had some questions. Real quickly, I know that you've had me come before in the past to do a training. Substance use disorders is now considered a chronic brain disease with bona fide diagnoses, and any such diagnoses would have a need for chronic management of a chronic disease. And so what I did was I put together some questions that may help you to identify and ascertain if someone actually is in authentic recovery. People will talk about recovery. I don't drink, I'm in recovery. There's a big difference between not drinking and actually being in recovery. Recovery is much more about integration of new life principles into the person. Their way of thinking, as we know, worldviews change slowly, and it's incorporating a lifestyle and new worldview to address a chronic disease. Interesting enough, substance use disorders run the same parallel clinical pathways as cancer, as asthma, as hypertension. And so because of that, there is an aggressive treatment plan to if you would, initially address the pathology, and then to look into long-term sobriety, which is different from just not drinking. You'll hear on the street a term called a dry drunk. It means somebody quit drinking or quit using a mind-altering substance, but their behavior has not changed. That is not recovery. And so I'm delighted to bring you this information, and I'm here to answer questions as well. One of the things, if somebody comes to you and says that they are in recovery, one of the questions that is very helpful is, how long have you been in recovery? And what is your sobriety date? If somebody does not know the sobriety date, they are not in recovery. It should be a prominent, specific date in their mind of when they made the decision not to use an illicit or any mind-altering substance again, whether it be alcohol, whether it be a narcotic, whether it be, and a lot of compulsive behaviors can fit into that cat. Overeating, that to a point of bulimia, whatever that is, should be a definite date. If they don't have a date, they're not really in recovery. So please keep that in mind, because behavioral changes have to be necessary and demonstrated to actually be in recovery. Does the individual take responsibility for the alleged offense? I know you all are familiar with wonderful attorneys who will be accompanying your licensees generally to the table and give a lot of reasons, and there are always a lot of circumstances. If this person is not taking responsibility, it's considered externalizing. That is not recovery. Recovery is about showing up, taking responsibility for what I've done in the past, and doing what one can to offer amends for whatever that is. So if you hear somebody and their demeanor is arrogant, even if they're nervous, if they're forthcoming, if they're humble, that's going to be very important to really find out. I also included the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. These steps are used widely in several anonymous groups. They may substitute the word alcohol for narcotics, for cocaine, for marijuana, for whatever. And I'm not addressing the marijuana situation. I hear you all had a great discussion last night about that. But the first step, we admitted we are powerless over whatever substance, that our lives have become unmanageable. That unmanageability is a big issue. When somebody is externalizing and not taking any responsibility at all for an offense that brings them to this table in front of you, there's a great chance they're not really in authentic recovery. So I'd like to point that out. How many meetings do you attend each week? There have been several longitudinal studies that will suggest that 3 meetings a week is the minimum for long-term sobriety. Again, not just not using, but actual integration. Addictions or substance use disorders, they act like a terrorist. They hit good people. They don't even see it coming. It takes them down, and people lose everything precious to them until they die. That's the etiology. And whereas recovery is integration, taking back those parts of one's life and integrating into a whole new way of doing life. This is not about bad people trying to make them good. It's about sick people trying to help them get well. And so these things are going to be important. Do they have a sponsor? A sponsor is a peer who has gone through the 12 steps of recovery. They have an element of sustained recovery and sobriety. One of the things I always ask is, how many years of sobriety does your sponsor have? In your diversion program, which I have the privilege of being the case manager, we require at least 5 years. Now, not every sponsor has 5 years of recovery, but they should have some years, and the person should know how many years the sponsor has. How often do they get together with their sponsor? Tell me about the sponsor. Those things are going to be very important. For instance, there are a lot of folks who have a lot of difficulties with narcotics who are going to AA. They may not have a problem with alcohol. It's just that AA tends to be more established. It can feel a little more conventional, and some people actually hide out in AA because they don't have to address the issues of Narcotics Anonymous or NA meetings, which is often the case. And so if you hear about their meetings and they're going all to AA, but they're in front of you because they were diverting medication or impairment at the job, that would be a question I would have as an addiction specialist. You know, something to point out that would be important. How often do they meet with their sponsor face-to-face away from meetings? Generally, it is recommended that somebody meet weekly, face-to-face, particularly beginning of the road, but even for sustained recovery. People who have recovery, you know, sobriety over 15 years still meet with the sponsor. They still connect with the sponsor. At that point, may not see them face-to-face weekly, but many do. And so, again, you're looking at a long-term chronic condition that pathology was treated back here. Now we're talking about wellness. How does this person maintain their wellness enough to practice safely? Not for, definitely for animal care, but also even for people care. Like if they're driving and they're impaired and they kill somebody on the way. So those things are going to be really important. How often do you call your sponsor? You know, if they call them, oh, I get together once a month, you know, that's all I talk. Well, that's not a continued close response. The sponsor doesn't have huge credentials. They walk them through these 12 steps of recovery in depth. How does that apply? These, by the way, there's nothing religious or mystical about these. These are just good life practices for anybody on the planet. People who may have an issue, they'll say, you know, that's religious. They talk about a power greater than themselves. The original AA mentions the word God as they understood him. Higher power could be the doorknob. It can be the group process. I mean, anybody they want. For individuals who have issues going to, in our program, it is a 12-step focus. If they have difficulty with that, with traditional meetings, there are some known secular meetings that will try to match up to meet their needs. They're called Smart Recovery, Rational Recovery are a few of them. Many people have preconceived ideas about what AA or NA or NEA meeting are, and when they get there, they find out, oh, this isn't about religion or weird stuff or anything like that. So that's just an idea to give as a point of reference. So also asking about what step are they currently working on with their sponsor. Just because somebody goes through these 12 once with their sponsor, that really isn't enough for sustained recovery. Because when people get to step 1, admitted that they're powerless over alcohol or whatever, that their lives became unmanageable, usually at that point people are at their low point and sort of emotionally hemorrhaging, if you will, and very desperate. And half the time, they don't even remember what they did in step 1 at that time. When they finish the 12 steps and they go back to step 1 again, they're in a whole different space that more can be revealed in their life. And so that's something, again, to consider. Do you have a service commitment? The 12th step in this program has to do with having a spiritual awakening. Again, a difference between religion and spirituality. Spirituality is a connection to something higher. To have a spiritual awakening, to provide service for others. Service commitments can be to facilitate one of the meetings, known as a secretary or facilitator of one of the group meetings. It may be making the coffee in the group. It may be cleanup or setup or reaching out to somebody new. It doesn't have to be horrendous time-consuming things, but do they have a service commitment? Because again, statistically, research will suggest if somebody is involved with giving to others and not just taking, their risk for relapse is lower because they keep a little more focused and less self-centered. So that will be important to remember. Tell us about your 4th step. This is a big assessment step that has several inventories involved. The purpose of the 4th step is to identify what are things going on in your life that has a grip on you that you're not even aware of. Okay, and there'll be a fear inventory that one will do with their sponsor. There'll be a financial inventory. There'll be a sexual inventory, relationship inventory, several different inventories to identify some of the things in the person's life that have been messing with them that they haven't really learned tools to deal with differently. And so that'll be important. If they can't let you know about a fourth step, they're probably not working a program. So these are important keys. Tell us about your ninth step. The ninth step has to do with offering amends to others for the wrongs that they've done. Now, sometimes those amends will be in person. Sometimes it's to a profession. They'll, veterinary medicine, they'll contribute to, something to do with, third country, folks over there taking care of animals. I don't know. There could be several different things besides speaking directly to someone. Sometimes it'll harm that person. Perhaps with their sponsor, they'll write a letter to what they would have said, or the person's passed and not even alive yet. Just a way of owning their part, regardless of the response of another person, so they could, if you will, keep their lives and their side of the street clean going forward. And step 10 is the daily inventory. Daily, at the end of the day, looking at, did I hurt anybody? What were my motives? Was I trying to manipulate? If I did, I need to make that right today. Again, these are really good living principles for anybody and to have a healthy life. And so these are really important. One of the questions, is there anything else that you can tell us? Again, these will be some key questions so that you can get a feel about, is somebody humble and actually working a program of recovery? Do they really know about it? Is their demeanor matching their words? They're obviously going to be a little bit anxious in front of all of you, and that's understandable. But as you practice this, these questions, I think it will help you feel more confident of whether or not this person is indeed in a recovery program and safe to be reinstated for their licenses again. So that's it in a nutshell. Is there anything that I can explain? Do you need me to go through the 12 steps in a nutshell also? Or?
I don't think so, unless
Okay.
somebody else wants that. But how many people do we have in your program?
Right now there are 5.
Okay.
There are 5, yeah.
And they're proceeding well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Again, the clinical model has a focus on aggressive treatment, particularly early on, and also education. Intensive outpatient programs are ideal at giving information and education about what substance abuse really is, and family dynamics, etc. If they need a higher level of care, they often go into residential treatment. Several residential programs have a professional track for healthcare professionals to be able to talk with other healthcare professionals while they're in residential treatment. When they do get out, part of our program involves that they need to attend twice a week a health support group, which is comprised of other health support group disciplines who are in recovery, whether they're generally in diversion programs, some are in a probation program, a combination, and bless you. And they discuss, being in recovery and being a professional, if you would, a specialty home group for healthcare professionals, a peer group that's often led by a licensed mental health therapist or a very seasoned alcohol and drug counselor in the state of California.
And how do you know when they're ready to practice again? How do you determine that?
Okay, well, actually, it is your committee who does that. The Diversion Evaluation Committee is hand-appointed, and these are specialists in the field of substance use disorders. The chair of our committee, very seasoned KDAC too, California Alcohol and Drug Counselor, works in a treatment center. We look at the initial information. I'll do a phone intake using the Addiction Severity Index to see where do they land on the severity scale. Again, we're looking at chronic, but we're looking at a scale. And what initial treatment they need. I call the chair. The chair is the final say on recommendations for treatment. And then they are seen by your committee in person and evaluated. In the middle of all of that, as your case manager, I compile reports from treatment, or from the healthcare, the health support groups, from any therapists that they're seeing and the like. And when they meet in committee, the committee already has all that information digitally. So they're aware of what has transpired. I'll do a clinical review of everything. I always update that before I get there, and I also verbally report to them. And then they assess the participant at that point. they decide, I think it sounds like they're safe to practice. A lot of secondary and tertiary accountability in place. The reports, they have to call me weekly until they're seen by a committee, and then monthly throughout the program. They have to have random testing. The random testing can be blood, it can be hair tests, it can be urine tests, and they have to be ready every day of the year. Every day they have to check in, weekends, holiday. If they're selected to test that day, they have to go and test. And they have to call in before 8 p.m. California time, or it's considered a missed check-in. That's a big deal, as you know from the uniform standards. And so the committee will look at all of that and decide if they are, safe to practice. Then when they are safe, they will put restrictions on that practice, how many hours they can work initially. They'll need a worksite monitor who our DVMs need another DVM. If they have their own cottage industry, they need a separate DVM that does not, that they don't pay, as office staff, to come in weekly at least to go over the records and to speak with them. Some of the other parameters, I have no overtime, no night shift, no back-to-back work, things like that. So the committee will set that up along with how many meetings that they're required to go to. They're initially required to do at least 90 meetings and 12-step meetings in 90 days. And, again, along with their treatment, their health support group, often therapy, we keep them busy. It's their full-time job. Some people, I'm concerned because they're removed from work. Again, uniform standards requires that till they're assessed. And at that point, they become patient for a little while to take an aggressive approach to see about the treatment they need for their substance use disorder, and they get them on the road to healthy and sustained sobriety.
How long is the average person in your program until they, shall say,
Successful
graduate?
Yeah,
For
generally,
lack of a better term.
Successful completion, a minimum of 3.5 years. Sometimes it's 5, depending on the the compliance of the individual. If somebody comes in and say they sign a stipulated agreement that they're going to do this, but they really don't want to, and they come in and their compliance kind of demonstrates that they really don't want to, then the committee will confront about that. They do it in a clinical tone, but they'll do that. If they don't feel that they're safe, then they'll close them. If somebody is successful and is compliant with the treatment and demonstrates healthy recovery for a period of time, they have to have at least 24 months of negative urines before they can ask for the final phase, which is a transition paperwork that they will write, mainly an autobiography of themselves, a very clear and clean relapse prevention, personal relapse prevention plan, identifying their own personal triggers and the subtleties, etc. Along with that, they are required to do relapse prevention therapy workbook and provide a summary of everything with that. And so that the final 12 months, they have fewer restrictions. They can work different shifts. They still need the worksite monitor at least weekly, but they don't have to get their sheets to go to meetings signed anymore. They don't have to go to the health support group anymore. We continue to monitor, obviously, on several levels. And then when they successfully complete, then, Ethan is our trustee liaison, and he is at the meetings as well.
Okay, Judy.
Well, I'd like to say a couple things. So I've been on the board 8 years, so I've seen you quite a few times, and I appreciate you coming in and talking to us. And these tips have helped us when we've had applicants come before us and ask for reconsideration or whatever. And I remember it was not very far after we had seen you, and you said ask about the recovery date. And there was someone in front of us that did not look like they were sober. Mm-hmm. And I asked what was your recovery date? And she didn't have one. She was like, and it was like, okay, that's kind of what I was thinking. So thank you. Okay. And then the second one is over the 8 years, we've had this challenge of getting enrollment up. And there's always been this push for outreach and whatnot. So 5 is a very large number compared to what it usually is, which is usually 0 or 1. So 5 is good. And then the committee, this committee is kind of a mystery. I don't know who they were appointed by. No, I'm getting there.
Oh.
I've been on the board 8 years. I've never seen any of these folks. There's been paperwork that's come up. We saw one guy, I remember. He was great. I don't remember seeing 3 people. But anyway, we've had paperwork come up on them, and they don't come before us, and we just reappoint them. And I think with the 4-year terms and the longevity of the board and whatnot, it would be nice to see these folks. Not to say, oh, they're no good anymore or anything like that, but to learn from them and talk to them and just know who they are. Because besides the one man that I do remember that we were so impressed with, I don't remember anybody else, but I do remember papers coming before me, and it's like, well, who is this person? And they've been on for a very long time, and I appreciate their service, but it seems like we should know who they are, at least see them once every 4 years or something. So that's the conclusion of my comments.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Yes?
Wow, I greatly appreciate the work that you do. Having lost friends and families to drug and alcohol, I realize that these people aren't out partying. These people have truly been possessed by a demon that no one but themselves can save them from that. But our job as a board is to sort of evaluate a person as they come before us to see if they are going to be granted the privilege and the honor of practicing veterinary medicine again in our state. So just a couple of extra questions I had. We have had some people before us that are not in a 12-step program. They just don't go to those. So is that an automatic rejection? Because a lot of what I'm reading on this 12-step thing is having a belief in God. What if somebody doesn't believe in God? And is there no other way to go through a 12-step program in those people?
Yeah. Again, the higher power, this is the original from the AA from 52.
Wow.
Yeah, and so in today's world, they'll mention a higher power. Some don't even use the word God. And so if indeed somebody just goes secular and says, I don't go to 12-step because of that, you can ask about what secular groups do you go to? Because there are, again, Smart Recovery is one of them that's often attended. A Rational Recovery is another group that is purely secular that is attended. And so if somebody does not go to any at all and claims that they're in recovery, I mean, that's where the inconsistency comes in.
Okay, so that's a red line. They should
that
be.
Would be
okay.
Yeah, because if they go to a secular group but they still have some kind of service and they still have some connection, I think that's very, very key. In today's world, like I said, many don't even use they say the G word, the God, but they'll use a higher power only. In Maximus, when somebody comes in and objects, because we try to find suitable secular meetings to meet their needs. However, they do the rest of what we ask them to do, so that we continue to assess.
Okay. Outside of their sponsor and their support group, should we be asking them about their family and friends, like if the husband is still a drinker, or are those questions we should be asking?
Well, again, you can to find out how the family dynamics goes. I'm not sure how much forthcoming someone might be. They may catch them off guard. But if the husband still drinks, one thought would be, have you ever checked out Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous, CODA? Because those are groups that are specifically focused on relationship boundaries. If someone else is using, or if somebody... we healthcare professionals are known to be very codependent. It's our middle name, period. Whatever healthcare profession that we can, we have tender hearts. We don't always take care of our own. And so these can help. You can ask about that. For some, a very legitimate question, how do you handle it when your husband, drinks? And particularly if they're smoking marijuana in the house, this is your license. How do you handle that? Or There have pain pills, you know, are they in a locked box? You know, how do you take care of yourself if that's the case in where you live, or your child that drinks or whatever and it has in the home? Are there boundaries of not using in the home? You know, these are some questions that may be
Okay.
important.
And then a big reason that a lot of people are requesting reductions in penalty is they say it's too burdensome to do all this testing. It costs too much money. It's hard to do it.
Sure.
How should we respond to that?
Well, it's very interesting because the governor just signed a law in early December that will reconvene the original committee that dealt with the uniform standards. And we're signing the law way back in 2011, the 16 uniform standards for all healthcare, and they set the frequency. And so the frequency will be looked at, and the last word we've received is that actually all 16, oh bless you, of the uniform standards will be readdressed. I'm aware that CCM, the California Society of Addiction Medicine, their physicians are planning to submit their recommendations about what would be best practice in the state of California regarding standards, including testing. Right now, I realize that it is difficult when it's not in the hands of the board at this point. When people come in, many can get disability for their substance use disorder. It's a bona fide diagnosis signed by a physician. It may not pay the rent completely, but you know, I mean, it will help with the testing, and that can make a big difference. After the first year of practice, often the testing can go down a little bit. They get more latitude.
But I don't know if you've answered the question. I mean, I think you're saying that the testing frequency may go down with the new standards.
Yeah.
But when someone says, "I just can't afford this. I need a reduction of penalty because it's too burdensome for me."
Well, again, we look at if somebody had cancer, they're going to do everything they can to gather financial resources to deal with it, or it'll kill them. In the same spirit, so will substance use disorder.
Yeah.
Often we'll bring that up to be able to address that question. Some people will say, well, gee, I can't afford not to work. Well, gee, can you afford not to breathe?
Okay.
You know, that's another, because it is a chronic disease that can be deadly.
The last question I have, sometimes I feel a little bit squirmish about saying, tell us about your fourth step. You know, talking about their moral assessment and inventory. But we shouldn't be afraid to ask those questions.
No, they don't have to get in deep, really personal, but you can find out, do they know about them? You know, what kind of work did you do? They don't have to get into, like I said, really, really personal things. But, you know, this is, oh, yeah, my fourth step. Boy, that was a lot of work, you know, whatever.
Like sometimes I feel like, tell us why you're so messed up. You know, I'm a little squirmish about asking questions.
Well, that's more of a clinical viewpoint of it. The idea is an assessment of things in your life that have become some barriers to healthy living. You know, it's another way that you can put that. But they don't have to go deeply personal. I don't think that's relevant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have?
Just one
Another
quick question. I know you've talked to this board before about people who they've been out of the program for a certain period of time, and Maximus tries to track those people to see if they've had any relapse in their sobriety. How do you go about tracking relapse? What's the rate of relapse? I know there's national statistics on that, but do you have statistics regarding your program participants in terms of, are they better prepared to not relapse because of the intensity of the program? Because I think that's really important when we talk about the board can't mandate that someone go into Maximus. They can either voluntarily submit to the program themselves because they identify they need rehab, or through a stipulated settlement, we would negotiate that it's the board-approved program, which is Maximus. And that's important because if this program has better statistics in terms of prevention for relapse, 5 to 10 years out, that's an important factor that I think is the board needs to hear and those in the audience.
Unfortunately, there is not a definite way to accurately account for recidivism after someone successfully completes, because that would require them to consent to ongoing testing, which is expensive, which they won't do. But what I can tell you, that the research suggests that the more comprehensive and longer term that someone can be in sustained recovery, the better their chances of not relapsing. After 4 years in our program with 8 of the healthcare professional boards, our relapse statistics is about, I believe the last one was 13%. Recidivism, or relapse rate in many treatment centers is as high as 90%.
Wow.
But we attribute that to comprehensive care, to support by another healthcare professional, to the case management piece, and to the monitoring. Because did
you just say 90% relapse?
Many will in the first year.
Wow.
In other treatment programs.
Yeah, in
other treatment
Yeah, if
programs.
you look at some of the national stats.
I just want to make sure I didn't hear that
right,
wrong.
somewhere from 59 to 90%. Yeah, and most of ours, are in the first 6 months. There have been instances where physicians will and nurses, excuse me, others will relapse after that. But
Did you say what your program's relapse rate
I'm
is?
sorry?
Did you say what your program's?
13%.
13 to 14%, I believe, is our in 4 years, the
Wow.
last statistic. And so
Wow.
a lot of it is the several components that work together. And so that's why we're looking at. We're not looking at just monitoring. We're not looking at just send somebody to treatment and good luck out there. When someone is sent to treatment, say they start with residential, then they'll go to the intensive outpatient. And then that's followed by 52 weeks of continuing care or aftercare. It's a weekly group. Pardon my allergies here. And so that can make a big difference as well. And then ongoing with the health support group, with their own peers group, we help them to establish a network of support in their community, which is really where it works the longest. Having a service commitment, having a home group, a particular group that if you're not there, someone's going to call you. These are part components together that can make for a strong program.
I wonder if like even, do our associations use your services like CVMA or just not necessarily people that have been going through disciplinary action? Anyone can go through that program, right?
Yes. Anyone can use this. I'm not aware right now, but my hope is that they will, because we're here to help save lives.
Do you do any outreach too?
I do. Is any opportunity that I can. We were actually scheduled to go to UC Davis, and right at the end they canceled on us.
Oh, no.
And so I know.
Got to get back out there.
Yeah, I've done the RBT conference at UC Davis on a weekend. Just had a chance to talk with them and have a little. At the end, I've been in the lobby to answer questions afterwards. Would love to do more. It's just if we can get those connections in. I'm at your service and I'm at their service of the associations to help to train and get the word out, because our hope is that people will see that there's a way that they can not just restore their license, but to get their life back.
Yeah, have the life again. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there are some boards where their investigators will say, highly endorse that. You get all these folks, kind of thing, or you'll be hearing from me anyway, or whatever. But, again, it is, each board has their own model.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for
Any
the
other questions from the board?
Nope.
Any questions from the public?
Bonnie Lutz. Okay, so I have several clients who are on probation who end up with a stipulated settlement and then going to Maximus. And I have been completely unable to figure out who makes the decision regarding what looks to me like an open-ended suspension that they're put on. And frankly, that really sometimes is what forces the decision as to whether we go to a hearing or we accept the stipulated settlement, because at that point, the facts are usually criminal records. So those are stipulated too. So the only reason for going to the hearing is to convince the judge that the client just can't do this, what appears to me to be an open-ended suspension without any definite criteria. Now, I'm sure that there are criteria, but I can't ethically recommend to a client that they accept a settlement agreement that includes Maximus when I can't actually tell them, you know, what it is that they need to do to not be on suspension for a year and a half. Or, you know, who's going to make that decision? It's never been made clear to me who makes the decision as to how long the suspension is. And whereas in comparison, if they're able to go into a treatment program that they pick themselves, which is what we used to be able to do, or which they're already in, they're not on suspension. And in a lot of cases, suspension really works very negatively for somebody who has a problem like that. And also, then there's a financial issue where if they're on this open-ended suspension, they can't work and they don't know when they're going to be able to go back to work. So can I get some kind of answer as to who makes the decision as to when a veterinarian can go back to work while they're still on probation, when they can go back to work and be off suspension?
I'm happy to address that. It is not the heart of the Diversion Evaluation Committee to keep any veterinarians who have come into this program, diversion program, out of work one day later than their warranted safety to practice. Public protection is paramount, as well as the life of the veterinarian, because they're often, because work is very important for many, many reasons, they do not withhold the right to return to work unless there are mitigating circumstances such as relapses, such as missed check-in calls and testing inconsistencies and not checking in on a long-term basis.
So that's documented somewhere,
Yes,
obviously.
In our clinical notes.
So that sounds like what Bonnie needs.
Well, the program, the board owns the records. We don't own the records, but when the committees
No, the
meet-
criteria, I mean.
Oh, the criteria.
Yeah.
For, well, again,
For
because it's a variable.
whether they're eligible to be at work or not. Obviously, if they've missed, I mean, these are things that she may not be aware of. They didn't call in. I mean, if there's a hard list of 10 things that, you know, disqualifies them to be put back in the workplace, you know, that's very solid information that's very useful.
So it's not a hard list because it's on a case-by-case basis.
Well, of course.
And what Bonnie's asking for, there's program criteria that speaks to why someone would be suspended in the first place.
Sure.
And then upon intake, the individual is evaluated by the clinical medical director and the diversion evaluation committee. There is a determination made whether or not that individual at that point in time is safe to practice.
Got it.
But it's not something like hard and fast where we could say, okay, they're only suspended for 7 days based on one positive test, biological fluid test. It doesn't work that way. It's a kind of a assessment overall of the individual state at that point in time. Correct. Some of this what comes into play is a medical evaluation, the physical evaluation, psychological evaluation. If a medical professional has already deemed them unfit to practice, they're going to have to be suspended until they can successfully overcome at least that current state.
Yeah, and I understand that, but again, it's this open-ended, like in the settlement agreement, it says that you will be on suspension until it's determined by Maximus that you're safe to return to work. And in those cases, before that, there wasn't a medical evaluation. There wasn't anything. There was just the accusation was filed, and then because the facts are criminal records and there's no reason to go to the hearing and discuss those, then we'd like to be able to go into settlement. But the problem is, the client is facing this open-ended sort of unknown of how long will I be suspended and who's going to decide that.
Not every person is suspended.
Right. Well, state law requires that at least a month of testing has to occur
for everybody that enters the program.
Uniform standards. They have to be off at least 30 days. Okay, well, at any rate, and to see that they are testing negative,
Yeah.
and then they also are sent to a clinical assessor who is a mental health professional with experience with substance use disorders.
Okay. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but, so we can't talk about individuals because it really will vary, but
Right.
can you talk about averages?
Right. Well, again, there's no algorithm. This is because people don't fit in an algorithm. But the big criteria are the negative tests, the progress of somebody in their treatment, their, they're presenting information. Those kind of things will be evaluated by the committee regarding return to work. Often we get a physician's fitness to return to work letter.
I think I have something that might help. Maximus does operate off of the minimum standards, the uniform standards. They're not part of our disciplinary guidelines per se at this point in time, but since that's the Maximus model, because the other boards within DCA do operate on the uniform standards, those standards are public.
Yeah.
So perhaps if, Bonnie, if you had those standards, that would give you a better idea of the guidelines that Maximus has to follow in order to comply with those laws. And it does talk about the suspension and the testing for a month of clean tests. And so the uniform standards are something, they're online, they're on the department's website. I think that might be a helpful tool.
No, and that might be helpful. But
Yeah.
again, I'm in a situation of advising my client. And frankly, I can't advise a client to take that program if there's this sort of open-ended suspension that could happen. That's really the problem, and that's
I think
guess
if
it is
they're
open-ended
if they're
because other
clean-
programs don't have that suspension.
So if they're clean at, it's a month of testing clean. If your client's not abusing, I mean, that's your answer. So if your client's abusing, that suspension is probably going to extend beyond that month.
Okay, but that's not the way it's worked in practice. And I know we can't talk about individual cases, but that's been my concern, is that.
Dr. Nunez.
So, I mean, I totally get the point that you're trying to make, Bonnie. And the only answer that I would have to that is that the suspension will not be 1 day longer than it needs to be based on their evaluation. But what also concerns me is that you said if you're left with that option of an open-ended suspension, then you would rather go to a hearing so that a person can have an answer as to how long they'll be on suspension, and then potentially be working when they are going to pose a harm to the. And I don't like that strategy at all.
That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is we go to the hearing because at the time of the hearing, if we can put on significant evidence and convince the judge that the treatment program that the person is in already, and we put the people in charge of that, we put the psychologists and the psychiatrists, and we get all their data. We put on all this evidence, which is mitigating rehabilitation evidence, that the client, the vet, should be allowed to go into X program rather than Maximus. We're not suggesting that impaired people be allowed to practice. What we're looking at is the difference between being made to go to Maximus when there is this open-ended suspension and being allowed to go in a program that they're already involved in where we can put on significant.
But when I hear that Maximus has a 13%,
Right.
and then these other programs that you say, well, let's go with these other programs, can have up to 90% relapse rate, then I'm still not comfortable with that strategy.
Okay, well, I mean, again, that's your opinion, but there's no data that shows that the other programs have 90%. I mean, we have.
I thought we just heard there was data.
Well,
This sounds to me like a disciplinary guideline issue because the Maximus program has established guidelines for determining what happens after the probation has been established. But I think what you're talking about are the terms and conditions going into the probation. And that's a disciplinary guideline issue because I think what you're looking for is some leeway as to which program can be stipulated to or right. So I think potentially we're getting off topic, and maybe that discussion is better saved for disciplinary guidelines.
I mean, no offense, but our goal is consumer protection, and that's not your goal. I mean, your job is to get them back working.
But that's not entirely true. I mean, I think that's an unfair comment. I mean, I think for those of you who know me know that that's not true. I mean, I'm not at all wanting to put people out in the community as veterinarians that are unsafe to practice. I'm just trying to do the best job I can for them. And so I would like to look at the statistics from some of these other programs actually on recidivism and compare them to Maximus, because I don't think we've really gotten a scientifically verifiable comparison right now. So, I mean, I think it's unfair for you to say that. In all good faith, I come to these meetings so that I can broaden my knowledge and help the profession. So I don't believe that I am trying to put unsafe people out there. So, thank you.
Just a side note, perhaps this may be helpful too. A lot of the treatment programs will do random testing. Some will even use the dipstick or something a little more sophisticated. When someone tests with our program, over 59 substances are tested for by gas chromatography, which is the Department of Transportation standards. There's also a medical review officer available to interpret. So again, it's a whole different picture of comprehensive care. You're welcome.
There's 59 drugs you could potentially abuse.
And there's even like
beyond
substances that people will take to mask. They'll test for the
Yeah.
substance. So yeah, and that's just, you know, again, and then plus the hair test, plus the blood test. So comprehensive. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Thank you, Stephanie. We really appreciate it. And Bonnie, we do also appreciate you being here and your comments.
Yes.
Okay, let's push on to agenda item number 19. Let's do the administrative and budget report.
Hello. Okay, so I dropped in front of you this morning a draft expenditure report where my memo's in front of you to review, and if you have any questions, please ask. What I did want to highlight, though, was that expenditure report came out of a meeting we just had. We meet annually with our budget office and our budget liaison, and we've unfortunately had a little bit of difficulty getting some expenditure and revenue data out of the new state fiscal system. So what you have in front of you is a mock-up of our best estimate where we're at budgetarily wise, and it kind of tracks in line with what we've talked about in the past about the very lean fund that we run and the need for our fee audit. And it does intersect a little bit with what's going on with those fee regs and the emergency implementation, because one of the line items in the expenditure report is a deficit in our AG expenditures and revenues. And that's something we're going to attempt to fix through a mid-year augmentation with a request to the Department of Finance for that augmentation. And that should be happening shortly. If you have any questions, please ask.
The deficit of the OPES, the IA, with OPES of 70,000, that's not the practice survey.
Yeah, these are our contracts for exam development.
Okay.
And you know, it's something that's come up in the past. Unfortunately, this report doesn't always line up with how the expenditures hit our budget.
Okay.
So some deficits look a little bit wonky because they're actually attributed to another line item.
Okay, and they're reflected at a different time.
What's spit out of the fiscal system, and we do know this. We do want to fix it so it's a more clear picture for
Okay.
everyone where the actual money is being spent and where we need to increase appropriations.
Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan?
Looking at this, I think we've talked about it in the past. Where would Maximus expense come in on this line, these line items?
And Maximus is it's an encumbrance. It is in CMP Services External. So if you see the bold headings right in the middle of the page, Departmental Services.
Yes.
CMP Services External is right above that.
Okay.
Our Maximus encumbrance is part of that line item. So what happens typically, we encumber, it's several dozen participants is what we encumber for. We don't always have several dozen. In fact, we don't. So we liquidate the contract. So that expenditure looks a little bit high now, and it's going to come back when we get the money back from the encumbrance.
Any other questions or comments? Any questions from the public?
I have a question about your request to permanently fund the 4.0 VACSP staff. According to your own report, you initially assumed that there would be 10,000 VACSPs issued. And according to your sunset report, it looks like you actually predicted 13,600 based upon the amount of money you were projecting. But in any event, you have now, I believe it's 3,600 VACSPs issued. That's about a third of the 10,000 estimate. So why do you need all 4 of these positions?
That's covered in the board's budget change proposal, but in addition to just the taking in applications and getting the people licensed, what we found through the inception of this program is quite a few of these applicants have criminal history background. And so we are spending a lot of time reviewing applications, going through denials, accepting appeals, going through the AG's office to identify which of those individuals we have to file a statement of issues for. So the workload has actually been more on, if you want to call it the enforcement side, it's still an administrative process, whether you're going to accept or deny. Then there's also the issue of a transient population that we've been dealing with, which means these individuals, because they're kind of the entry level to, veterinary medicine, they tend to change jobs a lot or maybe leave the field altogether. So we're having a very difficult time tracking these individuals, and that includes connecting them to their supervisor, determining whether or not we need to cancel the license because we can't get communication with them and they have to communicate with us about where they're working and who their supervisor is. So the workload has not been just from the standpoint of taking in the applications and making a decision. There's been a lot of workload associated with, 1, tracking the transient population that we seem to have on our hands, and 2, the, I think, percentage-wise, and we talked about this at the last meeting, probably 85% of the denials we're dealing with right now in terms of review of applications with some sort of criminal history is coming through the VACSP program. So that's where the workload is.
What percentage of applications are successfully completed?
Of the VACSP? I'm sure we can get you those statistics. I mean, if you're going to talk about we take in 100 per month, they're not all completed within that month.
You say 85% of them have a problem.
No, 85% of the denials that I'm reviewing have to do with VACSP.
Okay.
So on average, let's say I have 20 files at my desk to review to determine whether or not this person should get a free and clear license. Of those 20, there's probably going to be greater than 12 to 13 or more that are VACSP versus RVT and veterinarian.
So that would indicate to me that this is a problem program.
I don't think it indicates it's a problem program. I think you're talking about individuals that are just entering the profession that aren't paid, obviously, at the same level of an RVT or a veterinarian, and their investment may be slightly different.
And it's just beginning.
And it's just beginning.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's.
Are we still receiving a number of applications?
Yes, we are. And Ethan, in his licensing report, will cover the number of applications we're seeing from the VACSP program on average, and so we can go into that as well.
Yeah, I also want to note, in the BCP, it was an educated guess projection on number of applicants in the VACS program. I suspect there's a little bit slower adoption rate than we anticipated. And integral to that is the hospital inspection program to get the word out. So I think there may be a direct correlation between the number of inspections we can do and determining the licensure level and making sure those premises know that the veterinary assistant should be licensed if they do the duties of a veterinary assistant controlled substances permit holder.
So
That's a
Ethan,
good point.
right, so we've suspended the program the last 2 fiscal years, and our outreach efforts were going into the hospitals and explaining to the managing licensee that if you're going to have people access and administer controlled substances, they have to be registered through the program. So we haven't had the same outreach, we haven't been able to do the same level of outreach because of funding issues.
Yeah.
So that has, in some ways, handicapped us from getting to the public, but we've done, Ethan and his staff have done a valiant job at working with the associations to try to get the word out there. I do think this population will continue to grow. We just don't have the spike that we anticipated at the very inception of the program, which was October of last year.
Yeah, and we're regularly seeing hundreds of applicants a month. So there hasn't been a significant drop off other than the initial spike when the program kicked off. With that, I can go to the another report. Any questions?
Any other comments from the public? Yes, if you want to go into the exam licensing report.
Okay, memos in front of you. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. I did want to highlight a couple things. We did talk about having the RVT AAVSP job analysis at this particular meeting. That was delayed. Unfortunately, we lost our psychometrician at OPES. It set back our report, unfortunately, until next meeting in May. But we will have that, and along with that, there'll be a revised exam plan for the California RVT exam. And additionally, what I'd like to report is we have talked about doing a website redesign. We've met with our internet team, staff at the department, and Amanda's been incredible in helping that effort and kicking off a new website. We are hoping to have something viewable by this summer. The new state template is very modern looking, and we're going to take advantage of the latest and greatest that the state offers as far as the usage of the template, and hopefully add some areas to the website that I think are needed, like an inspection area and an enforcement area. It's also more easily accessible.
It's so frustrating. It's like you put in somebody's license or their name, you hit, search, and then you get dumped into the general search for all licenses under DCA, and instead of coming back to the veterinary medical board, and it's like, then you got to go all the way out, come back in again. There's so many problems on that website. So
I'm sure this will be an upgrade, so this will be much better.
Well, how about user acceptance testing? Do you have?
We have to talk about that. We've talked about bringing in people that don't know the veterinary medical board, what they do, and having them poke and prod the website.
I know that you learn so much going through the Breeze process with the proper software implementation on how to do things, and that's what you need is when you are so close to it, you know how to get around stuff, but you need users that, like you said, are from the outside and just start clicking around and find the problems and then fix them.
Okay, Dr.
And I'll be happy to be one of them. I will.
In the past, we've talked about having a separate page for complaints on unlicensed activity. Is that possible in the new format?
Complaints on unlicensed activity.
So when a public member goes in and makes a complaint.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I do have what they call a ticket in with the OAS to investigate that issue. Without going into too much detail, we're trying to navigate whether the larger software allows for that kind of change versus there are some things we do individually as a board to update certain parts of Breeze. Haven't been able to ascertain whether that's a global change that needs to be made or a local change.
Okay.
But we definitely have the question out to OAS.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And how is Breeze? Are we through the total implementation? Is it all in
place?
place?
At this point, it's a lot of just customizing to what we see as building in some efficiencies. I have a new AGP on staff that's leading the Breeze charge. That's looking at that kind of thing. Is what can we do? For example, sending out letters to be at the system versus hand generating in the office. stuff, just simple stuff like that, where it's a click of a button versus doing a letter template locally.
Okay. Dr. Nunez.
In regards to our 125th year anniversary, I think we need to have a gala or a television special because all we're doing is a logo and some emails.
I actually had stickers made.
What's the budget for that?
I'd be happy to provide you some.
We need to do more. It's 125 years.
We have no money.
Yeah, where's the budget for that? Yes.
So
Okay.
I think there is something planned in May, right? When the actual
Yeah.
125 year.
We kind of want to have, because May would be officially 125 years. It was based on the implementation of the original bill. We wanted to have something on the agenda that kind of talked about what that bill contains, some of the funny things that
That'd
needs
be
to be
good.
looked at. And actually, Dr. Richard Johnson, an old member of this board, was very helpful in getting us some information, and CVMA also was able to get us some really awesome information on the history of veterinary medicine that will be included in that.
We should do it. 125 years is impressive.
I still want a
It's
gala.
getting less and less and less.
Yeah, when I'm roll off,
Military
it won't
A
be
military
president
parade,
anyway.
yes.
Yes. Yes. Any other comments from the board? Okay, comments from the public?
I have a question about the statistics on the VTNE and also when we're going to be seeing the results of the individual school scores from the VTNE. It's been 4 years now that we've been using the VTNE, and we still haven't seen these scores. And we can't hold the schools responsible if we don't know the scores. And if you look at these VTNE passing rates, they're about 20% lower than they were when we were using a California exam, which means we're losing a significant number of RVTs every year by using the VTNE. So I think we need to do something about this. I don't know what the statistics are for the VTNE from other states. I think we need to look at that. Is something about California unique? Are other states having higher pass rates? Is the VTNE geared toward RVT practice in other states versus California? I don't know, but there's some reason why California RVT candidates are not doing well on the VTNE when they did much better on the California exam.
Is that something AAVSB might have, Kathy?
Yeah, I keep beating this drum, but a new system from AAVSB, when they kicked it off, I specifically requested those reports continue because we were getting those reports.
Right, I thought I seen something like that before.
They went to a new portal and a whole new reporting system, and I continue to ask if, I welcome the assistance if you wanted to provide
Maybe
that,
Kathy
but
can pursue it?
Continuously reached out to them
president?
to help
We have.
with the help of getting these statistics. There's other statistics, unfortunately, internally that we're not able to get just the same way, reported the same way. So those are other things we're working on as well.
Maybe, Nancy, you could send a letter to AAVSB as well to be helpful, put some pressure on. I mean, they should be able to deliver them. They had the data, they just changed systems, so they should be able to.
Okay, well, that's one issue, but what about this low pass rate? What can we do about that? I mean, do we have any input into the VTNE?
We continue to have the same question, and the answer is the same. We've done an occupational analysis of the VTNE to do a linkage study with the practice in California. So the findings of that occupational analysis will give us some insight into whether or not the VTNE still represents adequately the practice, the entry-level practice of RVTs in the state. And it was finalized, I believe, in December, the actual study itself. The Office of Professional Exam Services, and this is in Ethan's report, is preparing their report to present to the board, which will happen at the next meeting.
Well,
great.
that will analyze their overall outline, but it doesn't analyze the test questions, which it's very easy. When you were initially comparing the California exam to the VTNE, and you looked at the occupational analysis, people said, "Oh yeah, well we don't need to have questions on dental extraction because they have dentistry as part of their occupational analysis." but they don't do dental extractions in other states. So you have to look at their item bank to see, do you actually have questions in dental extraction to find out.
They did look at their item bank as part of the overall study, the linkage study. So perhaps these questions should be brought up when OPES, the Office of Professional Exam Services, is presenting that study at the next board meeting.
Okay. Well, I will certainly bring those things up next time.
Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan.
I think Nancy's point of finding pass rates of other states should be a pretty simple, straightforward way of getting an answer pretty quickly on that issue.
Yeah, because if Oregon gets 70% average pass rate, or New York or whatever, and we're getting 50, what's the problem?
I think there's already that information is what the percentage is nationally versus California.
It may be on AABSV's website.
It is. I think that's already available.
I don't think they've ever provided us a breakdown from other states directly to us.
It's not by state. There's a national average.
Well, even a national average would be
Yeah,
helpful.
and that's available. I believe that's available on their website. Now, I don't know if you have to be a member to get it, but that's a question for AABSV.
We should look.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer.
I will be looking forward to that. I've heard from more than one RVT program their concern over these pass rates because it impacts their accreditation.
Yeah.
So I think the entire RVT community will be looking forward to our May meeting.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, so we're going to enforcement.
Yes.
Candace is not here.
So I'll do enforcement, the enforcement report. Let me get back to it. Hold on. So the board is tracking to have over 1,000 complaints this year based on the trend up till this point. That's in the statistical profile. We're averaging almost 300 complaints received a quarter. So I think that we're probably going to end up close to 1,000 complaints this year. Yeah, and I think we were over 1,000 if I'm not mistaken last year. So in our 2016, 2017, we ended up at 1,019. And we're looking at tracking more than that this year. So we have at least 27 complaints this year alone on unlicensed activity. We were asked to specifically parse out the unlicensed activity complaints versus those against licensed practitioners. We're monitoring a total of 106 probationers. We have currently pending 9 petitions to revoke. You know, the board in the past has asked generally what happens when someone's on probation and they violate a term of their probation. Is it an automatic petition to revoke probation? And the answer to that is not always, because sometimes those violations may be just a failure to submit a quarterly report in a timely manner, which sending that over to the Attorney General's office and asking them to revoke the license based on that isn't going to happen. So the violations range. I know of concern to this board in particular has been, what if someone has a positive drug test? What are we doing? Well, there's a process that we go through. First of all, we have to confirm whether it's a false positive or not. There are ways to do that. There are blood tests that occur. If it's a urine test false positive, we may then ask for what's called a PET test, where we're doing a blood test. We could do a hair sample, and then it goes to a medical examiner to say, you know, hey, this wasn't the cleaning detergent. You know, obviously there was something, because it can go back several months to see the volume of the substance in the body. And of course, at that point, if we've got someone who's abusing and, you know, obviously there's an immediate public health issue that we need to deal with, there's a process that we could either do an interim suspension order and proceed with something that removes the license immediately. But there is provisions for a cease practice order if someone is in fact abusing while they're on probation. And that cease practice order is something that can be put into effect immediately. So those are our options, and I wanted to make sure the board is aware that we are actively engaged when someone has either a positive drug screen, supervisor reports where the supervisor is deeming the respondent to be incompetent, or there's concerns about their ability to practice at the standard of care that is necessary for them to practice safely. We then need to engage with the supervisor. Was it one incident? Has there been several incidents over the course of the month? What have you done to change your supervision parameters so that we are monitoring this closely? Is there a one-on-one supervision protocol that you think is necessary so that we can inform the respondent, you know, you have to practice, there's a general direct supervision order, you can't provide this type of service without in-line of sight supervision based on the supervisor's report to the board being unsatisfactory. So those are the types of interventions, if you will, that our probation monitor will do in the case where we don't think someone is satisfying the probation terms. And then obviously, as you've seen most recently, we do petitions to revoke probation because it's clear that the individual is not able to comply or satisfy the terms of their probation. And the most responsible thing that we can do as a Consumer Protection Board is to seek to revoke that license. So I just wanted to provide some background on that, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
And in the past, we did ask Anne Marie if there had been globally an increase in complaints in other healthcare boards as a part of DCA, and
Did the research and looked at the DCA's annual report for 16-17, and I did not see an increase across the board, a substantial increase like we have seen. There are some boards that have a slight uptick in complaint activity. Other boards have actually had a slight downturn in complaint activity. So I think this is a unique situation for the Veterinary Medical Board, and I think it has to do with a couple of things. Having staff to really work the cases. So having staff to open the complaints in the system, to track them. What happened in the past is that we would have a complaint, and in doing the investigation, we find out that there's other prongs. There's other individuals involved. And the procedure was to perhaps keep that complaint consolidated under a one licensed person. We don't do that anymore because every person that the complaint addresses should have a separate complaint assigned so that we can track those complaints individually. So that has some bearing on, the increase in the numbers. Taking an active role in unlicensed activity. The board has done a really good job in the last couple of years at taking a look at some of the chiropractor situations that we've been dealing with where there's been chiropractors who have not been practicing under supervision, using our citation and fine authority. Even when the board is generating the complaint because we have received either anonymously or through another state agency information about unlicensed activity, we will then serve as the complainant and open a complaint. That's going to generate more volume. Having the hospital inspection program out there as outreach, that generates complaint activity because we're explaining to the community what the expectation is. And it's not uncommon for inspectors to be out there and hear from one managing licensee, hey, you guys really need to check out X, Y, and Z because I'm concerned. I've seen patients from that veterinary hospital and there's some serious problems over there. So those type of things I think are contributing to the overall complaint volume, but it is not, from my research and across the board, uptick in complaint activity.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and I think you touched on Anne Marie, because we have, until we had to curtail it, so increased our hospital inspection programs, that's because we're seeing more premises, that's also generating, I would assume, more complaints with non-compliance on things like that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public? Okay, moving on. Hospital inspection report. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Well, as you saw from...
Do you want to identify yourself?
You have to identify yourself.
Patty Rodriguez, the hospital inspection program. As you saw in my report, unfortunately, we've had to suspend the program earlier this fiscal year than last year. So in November, we suspended the program. So we're definitely going to fall short of our 20% goal. We're going to fall short of our 20% goal. We're looking at maybe 12% this fiscal year. So we're really hoping that the fee increase will definitely turn things around, and we'll get back on track for that. We're not doing the ride-alongs for staff or for board members until you know if the fee increase goes into effect, or we'll just do it next fiscal year. We're doing as much outreach as we can as different chapters, association chapters contact us and reach out to us, and we're more than happy to attend their chapter meetings. And we like to get the local inspector also to participate, to get their information out to the profession. If you have any questions.
Dr. Nunez.
I had a question on our budget. There's some place where we are going to make it mandatory 20% inspection, and once we make it mandatory, then we can justify a budget change proposal. So I didn't realize currently it's just a goal, it's not mandated.
Yes.
And it's a goal because that's what Sunset Review told us to do.
That's what was put in the statute. And so in our legislative proposal that's currently being carried by the committee, a committee bill, it changes that language to mandatory.
Seems like a backward way to do things in state politics, but.
Kathy.
Just to clarify, if the budget change proposal doesn't come through, when can we reestablish? Is it at the beginning of the next fiscal year?
Yes.
Like July? Wow.
So regardless of whether the budget change proposal goes through or not, we will start the program again next fiscal year. We will probably have similar challenges in terms of, being able to provide enough resources to get to the 20% until we get the budget change proposal. What the fee increase helps to do is prepare the fund for that. So the fee increase will generate revenue that will go into our fund, our savings account, which Kathy, you know this process all too well. And so that way, when we submit the budget change proposal and the Department of Finance goes in and looks at whether the board is fiscally solvent, it sees that we have enough revenue generated in our fund to support the move of that money from our fund to our actual budget. And that will give us the money to subsidize the additional percentage that we need to meet that 20% mandate.
So if, say, the budget change proposal goes through as smoothly as possible, is there a chance that we could start inspections before July 1?
No.
It won't happen?
No, this fiscal year we won't be generating money to do more inspections. There's just not enough time, and we wouldn't, a budget change proposal, so it's a full year process. Yeah. So it happens, you start the process typically in March, you write your concept papers, and then they get reviewed.
The emergency part of that, how much that hurried it up.
But you can get it in May, right? You can get it in the May budget this year?
No, you would have to have submitted the proposal, and we're generating fees right now. So the whole idea is to get the fees generated, revenue, to go into the fund, so that when Department of Finance looks at that to make a decision as to whether or not the board could support that budget change proposal.
So it's not in there right now. That's
what the fee increase is doing, is generating the revenue.
Yeah.
Dr. Nunez.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused about the report that was just given, because it says if we get the fee increase, then we can resume inspections, but that's not the case.
Well, it is, but it's not right this minute. We can resume inspections, and we will resume
inspections starting the next fiscal year.
Right.
Okay. Because if we got the fee increase and resumed inspections this year, then that would make the likelihood of the budget change proposal not happening, right?
Well, so that's an interesting interesting analysis in that if you continue to absorb your expenses and move money around and shortchange other programs and then try to go to the Department of Finance and say, we need more money, they're going to say, it looks like you're able to do what you need to do within existing resources because you've been able to move money around and you haven't been overspent, and so you really don't need the money. So it's really clear that when we can no longer absorb the costs, which is where we're at. That's when the likelihood that you're going to be able to it's going to be successful to go through the budget change proposal. So yes, in answer to your question, let's say we generate revenue right now, which that's where we're headed, and we get a mid-year adjustment from the Department of Finance to subsidize enforcement, because that's where we need it right now. And that somehow frees up some of the budget so that we could maybe do a few more inspections. Could that hurt us down the line? It's possible it could. However, we are continuing complaint-related inspections right now. That has not been suspended. And so any money that we find has to go to enforcement, has to go to the complaint, because we know we have a problem. And that's what we're focusing on through the remainder of the fiscal year, is being able to fund those complaint-related inspections so that those aren't delayed, and then we don't have a serious consumer protection issue on our hand.
So if we diverted money to a gala, then that would be really bad?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Or a going away party.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public?
Thank you, Patty.
Okay, going on to agenda item number 20, future agenda items and next meeting dates. So, Anne Marie, if you can go through these.
I will. Okay, so next meeting dates. Prior to the the next scheduled meeting right now is May 23rd, 24th in Sacramento. However, because there is a need to have a telephonic meeting for recruitment purposes, the board should look at its schedule. And I would say the earliest we would be able to have a meeting, if we posted it on Monday, I think I had that, is probably March 7th. Tara, correct me if I'm wrong. We posted on Monday.
If you posted on Monday, I've got March 8th.
Okay. Oh, so you can't count Monday?
I think one.
Why is she doing that?
I am counting Monday.
Monday the 26th?
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, I come up with
8,
a 7.
9, 10.
Do you have, are you on the
I'm counting backward from.
We have to establish a VCPR before we go to the airport. I want all 3 vets to establish a VCPR with her today.
Okay, that's what I just asked.
Okay, yep.
Okay, so we can't count Monday, the day of the posting. So the soonest we could have the telephonic meeting, my apologies, is March 8th. And we could hold it during, a noon hour if that makes it better for folks. But what I need to do is to get everybody to send their locations to Amanda, the public locations, ASAP, because we have to get this thing done by Monday.
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
I have to check it out with the city of Laguna Beach and all
Can
that.
you do that this weekend?
No, they're not
Tomorrow,
open.
Friday?
I'll be at work.
They're closed every other Friday. I'm serious. It's the only place that I can really go that has all the requirements.
What,
I mean,
telephone?
I could maybe at lunch I could send a
Okay.
request. So it would be the 8th, Thursday the 8th.
Yeah. Dick,
Okay.
you're not available?
I would be in the morning.
Okay. What's your time frame that you would be available?
Well, there's a driving to Yosemite for a CE meeting,
Okay.
so I probably need to get out of LA around noon.
Oh, okay. So if we did it perhaps at 10:30 or 11?
Anytime before noon.
Anytime
6 o'clock,
before
7
noon.
o'clock.
No, thank you.
8 o'clock. 8 o'clock would be good. 8 o'clock.
If it's a Thursday before noon for me also.
Thursday before noon. Kathy, are you available? Okay, perfect. Tara,
Say 8 o'clock.
are you available?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm just concerned about getting.
I start work at 8 o'clock would be good.
By tomorrow.
Yeah.
For posting on Monday.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
It's,
we'll
and
do
it's, you
everything
have
I
all the
can.
language. I mean, it's only gonna be
What are we
that.
saying
We
right
can deal
now?
with it. Okay, if we can do it before noon? Okay, well, let's plan on 11 o'clock on the 9th, and if you guys want it earlier, we can do 10 o'clock. I don't want to take up too much time. I mean, sorry, the 8th.
Okay, so one more time, it's March 8th at 11 a.m.
If that's what everyone agrees to do.
All right, because I'm going to send the request right now to see if I can get that room.
Okay. Okay, so that will be for a closed session telephonic meeting. Well, then does
closed
Judy
session?
have to be at a public site
Wait
if
a
it's a closed
second, I don't
session?
have to-
It's closed.
So here's the deal. We need to open it up as a public meeting.
yeah.
Doesn't Nicole have to do some kind of presentation?
Yeah,
And then it goes into closed session, and then you have to report out what occurred.
yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
you still have to be.
Can
in
I skip that part and just go and
No.
call in it closed?
Then you can't be in on it. You have to be in on the whole thing. Yeah,
So I'm asking for the room for how long?
an hour.
Is that enough time?
I think so. I mean, I would say the most it
Say
would take
11
is
to 1
There
just
you
to
go.
get the window.
There you go. Okay. So that will be the next meeting, and I will also notify, or Amanda, we need to notify Dr. Nolan as well. Okay, thank you. So that's March 8th. Okay. Next meeting, and then from there, there's a change. It's August 29th, or excuse me. Well, that's the MDC's the 28th, right?
Yes, sorry.
So it would be August 29th and August 30th. And location to be determined at this point. And then November 14th, 15th. And then you guys will determine the location for that one as
I'd
well.
like to put in for the for the Orange County for August, please. Because
I'll second that.
Yeah, for those of us in that area.
Those dates are
it would
difficult
really
for
be
me. It would
great.
be easier in Southern California.
Where was the location that you had recommended?
This place that I'm, Dana Point, where the Fish and Coastal Commission met.
Yeah, because
It's
it is
called
a
the
state agency. You could meet there because it's a state agency location.
Yes, it was the Marine Mammal Center in Dana Point. I took pictures of it and sent it to you.
Yeah.
And they told me that they get the state rate.
Right.
There's a hotel right next to the place, and everybody loved it, and they've been having their meetings there for years.
So maybe we can check that out. It's Dana Point. I think it's the Marine Mammal Center. It might be a state.
It's where the Coastal Commission had their meeting, last meeting,
for
like
August.
2 months ago or a month ago.
Okay. So let's talk about agenda items for the next meeting. Before you have this tattooing of spayed and neuter animals. This was a public comment and a request that the board consider requiring tattooing for all spayed and neutered animals. There was some notion that this would be cost prohibitive, although I'm not sure that that's the case. It's something for consideration for a future meeting. I still think it's important to get the DEA out here to talk about registration of animal hospital premises. Different states, I think there's either 6 or 7 states that have in their Practice Act where you can register the premises instead of just the person for the purposes of DEA, and then there are what they would consider like sub-subscribers under that DEA facility license. It requires a change in statute, and there may be some legal considerations that we want to discuss, but I'd at least like you to be aware that that is an option, that DEA provides a DEA registration facility license. So for the next meeting, we've asked legal counsel to follow up on the following items: emergency response for the RVTs, the use of the term pharmacological agent versus drug or drugs. Also adding the item 3 to that regulatory provision under 2069, dealing with the use of pharmacological agents up to euthanasia for an animal that's suffering. To review the indirect supervision parameter for RVTs in terms of applying casts and splints, and whether or not by moving that language under indirect supervision, there is a indirect impact to veterinary assistants that we need to consider, and whether or not there is a better solution to that language. Disaster response language, Tara is going to look at providing feedback on the existing government code and whether or not we need to define declared emergency as what we're considering, what the intent is of that legislative change, which would be an actual disaster emergency and not just an individual situation that we consider an urgent situation. And finally, the licensee manager status for premises permits, working on the legislative proposal that would change who the applicant is, being both the owner and the licensing manager, and also the language having to do with when we actually discipline the licensing manager, what then happens to that premises permit if there is a substitution made of the licensing manager during that phase of discipline, and how we can prevent from this kind of maybe musical chairs or swapping out individuals when there's still a problem with the facility itself. So that's what I have to follow up from legal counsel. I think we are continuing. We will not be doing the corporate practice discussion until the August meeting, and at that meeting we'll be holding a public hearing on that. Any feedback we get from the AAVSB regarding telehealth should be reported at the next meeting. We will also be following up on the legislation that the board voted to either track or communicate to the author's office. In terms of follow-up that needs to occur between now and the next meeting, I think this is important to go on the record. We need to send a letter to the CDFA regarding their proposed regulations on medically important antimicrobial drugs. We've voted to send a letter to the AAVSB regarding their telemedicine draft policy. And we also need to send a letter to Assemblymember Kalra's office regarding the cannabis legislation to express our concerns about recommendations, inability to impose discipline for someone that may be over recommending the use of cannabis, and just expressing the board's desire to have something in writing on research as far as some sort of vehicle, maybe not this vehicle, but another vehicle that would encourage research on cannabis use in animals.
Or what about asking him if he could help facilitate, getting a budget bill come May, something like that, yeah.
Right. Dr. Sullivan?
So on these legislative bills that you've talked about that we need to improve wording on, our meeting is in May. Does that give us enough time to approve those changes and get them into legislation this year?
So you actually approved conceptually the changes on the licensing manager and premises permit application, so Tara can just work on that language, because keep in mind, Leg Council is going to change it anyway. It's just so that the concept is clear. So we can do that without any more interaction from the board. The legislative proposals on rendering services to an animal during a declared emergency, you've approved that concept and given us the authority to kind of work with CVMA and the author's office on defining that language so it captures the goals of that legislative proposal. So you would not have to do anything as a group before we could communicate those changes. And the letter to Kalra's office is just expressing concerns.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my next question is, before our next meeting, there are one bill that we know for sure that is coming up.
That's right.
How do we handle that, especially if it's after you leave? Can we have some discussion on that? Because I think that one bill we're just talking about is maybe in print now, but we need to be able to address it before our next meeting.
So We could add it to this telephonic meeting that's coming up. That's a possibility. We don't want to get off agenda. I can talk to you about it. The executive committee of the board, that being the president and vice president, can weigh in on legislation, especially if it is, and that's in our administrative manual, if there is time consideration and we need to have a position put forth or at least concerns expressed. So that's an option. But if it is something that you think requires the full board involvement that you don't feel as the executive committee you're comfortable doing that, then you would want to call a telephonic meeting.
Okay. I have a couple of other items, but can we add this to the August meeting instead of the next meeting?
Sure,
'Cause
I'll make a note of it.
I think it would be good to keep May light with all the
Okay.
interviews we're going to be doing.
Oh, yes, we're also going to be doing the MDC interviews at the
interviews.
May meeting. Okay, thank you.
And hopefully other interviews. The first one I have is, I don't want to slip through the cracks. Jennifer brought it up earlier, and that is a duty of RBT's compounding. I think that we need
Okay.
to address that in that section of regulation. And, yeah, that's it, section 2036.
Thank you.
I think. Oh, and then in the that August meeting, we've kind of let this slip through the cracks over time. We do need to look at the cost that Maximus is what Maximus is costing us, and evaluate whether we need to raise the participants' fees.
Mm-hmm. So that would have to be done via statute. It's set in statute, so we would have to address
The participants'
that.
fees are set in statute?
I'm pretty sure they are. No, they're regs. Okay, so we could change them by regulation. Is our fee set in statute, how much we have to put into the program?
Yes.
Something's in statute.
Go.
That's okay, we'll look into that.
We'll research that.
Well, either way, we need, because the last time I remember us discussing it, I was surprised at the percentage of cost that the participant is paying was really low.
Yeah. Okay, and that may be something, Dr. Sullivan, that you would want to address in sunset review. If there is something that we have to change in the statute, that would be a good time. If it's strictly regulation, then that would be better served at a board meeting where you guys can look at the regulatory provision, yeah.
But we still need it, even if it's statute, we need to discuss it.
Right, absolutely, but I would just recommend if it's
Yeah,
statute that
okay.
it's handled next year in sunset, yeah.
Right.
Any other questions from the board?
I would like to see the issue of pet ambulances put on the agenda. August.
And what about pet ambulances?
There's no regulation of them.
Well, I'm not sure. I think the one that's in our area, and well, this is off agenda, so put it on the agenda.
So regulation, I just need to understand what we're doing on the agenda.
Does it qualify under house call practice, or does it qualify,
Does it need a
fit
premise
under
permit or?
a premise permit that we have now?
Oh.
Or
The one in our area works under a premise permit of a fixed facility, so I'm assuming that's.
There are those that do work with a fixed facility, but not all of them.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, then that.
Okay, are we done with future agenda items?
We have people.
Yes, but any more questions from the board for future agenda items? Okay, questions from the public.
I believe you were going to be discussing the MDC recommendation for a change to 2035 duties of the supervising veterinarian.
Yes.
Did they?
Yes.
They did solidify that yesterday?
Move it forward, yeah.
Okay.
That
And
would
I
be for the next meeting.
Yeah, and I thought there was one other one now that you mentioned it.
No, it was the indirect supervision one that they didn't pass.
So I just wanted to.
Oh.
Is it my turn?
Go ahead, Val.
I just wanted to refer back to the letter in the packet from Dr. Clemens. We've had many questions over the years about the dental extraction issue, and I think it would be a good idea for the board to discuss it. Thank you.
Can we put that in August?
Well, so, yeah, in May, we do need to add duties of the supervising veterinarian, and also, thank you, Dr. Sullivan, we need to add the the premises permit minimum standards. And that should be in May, that move forward from the MDC. Yeah, we're gonna have a lot to do again in May.
I know, May's.
Okay, so that's in May, and then in August, it's RVTs. That may be something that should be assigned to the MDC, so perhaps introduce it at the meeting in May so that it could be adequately assigned to the MDC for their future meeting.
Why couldn't we assign it now since it was a letter?
We could, can we assign something to the MDC that's from a public comment?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
you've got the MDC
Yeah.
listed here, so
Yeah.
you can just assign it.
Good call.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna assign to the MDC the matter of RBTs and dental extractions. Okay, anything else?
Any other comments from the public?
How about a 3-day meeting in May?
Yeah, we might need it.
Well, we already really have a 3-day meeting with the MDC.
No, that'll be a 4-day meeting.
That's up to you guys.
You're not gonna be here.
I was gonna come, but I don't know now.
Okay. So we are done, no more comments from the public, and so we're done with open session. We will go into closed session, and we will immediately take a restroom break and grab lunch, and hopefully, does everybody just want to continue working through lunch? And we'll work on our cases.
Are you gonna do steps first or PDs?
I need a bathroom.
I'm starving.